Sure.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Okay, well, we're live. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to January 10th, 31st, 2026 edition of the Saturday Free School. We're going to continue talking about a lot of what we've already been talking about the past couple of weeks, but especially the Battle of Minneapolis and the growing unrest across the country, as well as the Davos World Economic Forum summit that happened a few weeks ago. And I'll turn it over to Doc to start us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. Maybe the new people can introduce themselves. To start with John.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm John. I've lived in two different parts of Philadelphia, and I listen to your discussions on YouTube, and maybe at the end I give a comment on maybe some of the things that are said, and so I'm just here to try to listen and learn as to what is said.
Mm.
So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm from Bethlehem. I agree. I'm also here to listen and learn. I'm here for a recommendation by one of our comrades in the American Communist Party. Heard a lot of good things. Ready to listen and learn.
My name is Ezra. Thanks for having us. I'm from Philly as well. Yeah, here with the American Communist Party. Really excited to join the session today.
Oh, hi, my name is Edward. I'm also with ACP. I came in from Lancaster City this morning, and I've never been here, so I'm just going to probably mostly be quiet and observe, but thanks for having us.
Well, welcome, everybody. I mean, I know John he was here for the Mother Bethel event and has followed us on YouTube. And, this is a long-term project. In our 15th year, practically. So you dig where we're coming from. Today we want to deal with Davos and the Battle of Minneapolis. Really, we're talking about the Davos crack-up and the undoing of white civilization. Davos was founded in 1971 as the World Economic Forum. That's 26 years after the end of World War II. And by this time, a whole set of global institutions had been put in place, most notably the Bretton Woods system, which established dollar hegemony, and then, of course, next to that was the formation of NATO. What I should say is this was not just about European economic power or unity. It was really about maintaining the old colonial system as a neo-colonial system. Europe had been severely wounded, I guess we can use that word, by World War I, Great Depression, World War II. And the only Western or white nation which had not suffered war on its shores was the United States. The United States comes out of World War II with 75% of the world's gold. Most of the existing manufacturing was in the United States. And so the United States dictated what today they call the rules-based system. The dollar became the equivalent of gold. And it was not until 1971 that the United States went off the gold standard. And today we're still in a situation where the dollar is a fiat currency. Backs it up as so-called good faith of the United States state, the stability of the United States government. One can therefore extrapolate that part of the current crisis is the crisis of dollar hegemony, what is called the how do they put it? The unusual privilege of the dollar. That has so many consequences, but as we have spoken, and I think this is most important, the maintenance of the U.S. empire. In other words, we have a $38 trillion sovereign debt. That debt is that debt in large measure is the cost of empire. It would be much higher were it not for the exorbitant, what they call the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. We don't have to talk a lot, but just know that it is the Bretton Woods system of dollar hegemony. And it is around the dollar and Bretton Woods that the Western imperialist and former colonialist nations were united. But at the core of all of this is the domination of the world, the colored world, the former colonized nations, and the establishment of a system of neo-colonialism. When Bretton Woods comes into being, China had had its revolution, India's independence movement had been successful, Africa was fighting for independence, and the South American nations were trying to find a way forward in economic development. But China was extremely poor. The China we know today, you would not recognize China in 1949. You just wouldn't recognize it. It was maybe the second poorest nation in the world. And today it's the second largest, if not the first largest economy. India was poor, and like China, the majority of its people suffered starvation. Africa, interestingly, was not as poor as China and India, but it was poor. And of course, while this Bretton Woods and the unity of the white world, and I want to underline that because they saw it that way, was not just because the system is anchored to white supremacy. We just can't get around it. That will have a lot to do when we talk about Minneapolis. But in the face of this, the colored nations, the former colonial nations, meet in Indonesia and form the Bandung movement, which is ultimately an anti-neo-colonial movement. And so the West proceeded with a certain civilizational confidence. By the way, when you guys get a chance, you look at Becker's book, and he calls this capitalist civilization. We can go with that for the time being, but I think it's more than that. I know what he's doing. But the fact that he contextualizes it as civilizational is very important for now and what we talk about. But this civilization, this unity of white nations behind the US dollar and the US military is very important. It is on this basis that they launched a Cold War against the Soviet Union, but against all of these nations who were striving to break out of the grip of neocolonialism. So it wasn't just the Soviet Union, it was Cuba, it was Angola, it was Ghana, it was North Korea, yada, yada, yada. It was the whole non-white world. I think you all get to the immensity of this cannot be underestimated. And it required a civilizational confidence which today we would find extremely strange given the civilizational pessimism that we see today. But then, and this is before you guys were born, you could not imagine the confidence that the West proceeded under. And of course, the United States was in the forefront of this. Europe, people often talk about the vassal status of the European leaders and nations. Well, they decided, going back to the 1950s, that in return for becoming vassals of the United States, they could have a social contract with their people and social benefits. Like in Europe, almost every European country has universal health care. United States doesn't. Well, the trade-off was we will become vassals and support the United States, yada, 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 and we will be able to rebuild from World War II, but with a social contract that guaranteed a certain quietism of our working classes. And, it's so ironic that in many of these countries, they had these huge communist parties, like in Italy and France. I'm talking about the Western countries. Britain had this big Labour Party. Portugal, a very militant communist party, and on and on and on. And I remember back in my days, I'm saying, y'all got these big communist parties, but you don't seem to get nowhere. You seem to negotiate like a trade union would with the government, but without putting any revolutionary objectives before the working class of your people. But that was part of the bargain, that not only were the governments vassals to U.S. economic and political and military power, United States will defend you against the Soviet Union, and this was a great myth. In return, you guys can develop, you can have health care and in France, retire at 55 and, all of this shit that would seem like a dream in paradise to us, they got. But then they had to accept dollar hegemony and so on. But these big communist parties, these big trade unions and all, it didn't mean anything at the end of the day. They were part of the vassal system vis-a-vis the United States. And we never fully understood the extent to which anti-Sovietism had become a part of the political practices of the communist parties of these Western European countries. And many of the trade unions were led by communist parties, but they never sought power. They never sought power. It's very interesting. And in some ways, it was a kind of acceptance of a white civilizational hegemony. We would see this. I know I'm going all over the place. That's what Gorbachev represented. That why should we, for his definition, why should we Russians, and I'm not Soviets, why should we Russians carry the weight of the third world? Aren't we white? Or should we not strive for whiteness and to be a part of the white civilization? You even see this in Putin, and there's a tension over whether Russia, Europe or Asia, and it's still there, but I just wanted to bring that up. But certainly Davos was probably this Davos, and this is about 55 years later, 55 years. This Davos was maybe a turning point. Now, it seems that much of it pivoted around the speeches of Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, and Donald Trump. If you just, I think a good discussion of this, though not complete, is Ezra Klein's YouTube, where he interviews and discusses some of these matters with Adam Tooze. It's worth looking at. But again, it's not enough, I'll tell you that. But in the face of Trump's claim that it is he and his movement that can save white civilization, that is what he is saying. And to save the Western economic system, you have to save white civilization. He therefore said, I have a right to either buy or take Greenland. And that's only symbolic. You know, I have a right to go down and capture the president of a sovereign nation and to threaten to do it in other nations. This is way beyond the neocon project. And that the West, which now includes most of the former Eastern European socialist countries, like Poland, like Romania, like what was East Germany, and so on. They've all been integrated into the Western system under the framework of whiteness. We are all white people, and this is, I'll talk about it a little bit. The Baldwin paradox, by which I mean James Baldwin, and the Baldwin solution. Trump literally said, by the way, if you listen to his speech, a big part of it is like a campaign speech. He is God incarnate. In 1 year, he changed everything. The United States economy is the hottest economy in the world. I won't go to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They have some people, man. Everything is beautiful and yada, 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 And the only problem is that the Europeans are not following him enough, and they have been so derelict that they face a civilizational erasure. Mark Carney, I guess you all heard about this, gives a different kind of speech. He talks about the great rupture that the West is dividing, is segmenting between the great behemoth, the United States, and the rest. He calls it middle nations, middle-sized nations. But what he's talking about is all of those Western or white nations that are not a superpower. So it's Trump and the United States versus the rest of the West. Carney states truths that were uncomfortable not just to Trump, but truths uncomfortable to the West. And I'm certain that Carney never thought he would have to acknowledge what he in fact said, that the narrative, which is the white narrative, is mostly fictional. And for the sake of unity, we went along with a fictional narrative that we were all equal nations and Article 5 of the NATO Charter would be all of this, and we were all a part of the same white civilizational movement. He said this was a fiction that most of us went along with in order not to rock the boat. There are other things he said, I just can't remember it all right now, but that's the essence of it. And he quickly went on, and then, of course, with Trump imposing tariffs in this hostile way upon European countries, and in some ways threatening NATO, either you pay up or we're going to abandon you. And that NATO is a protection thing, a mafia kind of protection outfit, and that if the United States pulls back, then Europe faces the authoritarian Putin, which, if Carney wanted to keep it 100, he would have admitted, this is the great myth. But what we saw was a fracturing from within white civilization, or what they call the West. I don't like the concept. Why the West? Why don't you just say what, but they let it slip out at times, white people, they let it slip out. So they tell on each other, yeah. So this fracturing, this division, this deepening contradiction in the throes of a crisis of the legitimacy of authority in every white nation on the planet. So they break, but in each nation, there's a crisis of civilization, a crisis of legitimacy, a crisis of authority. It is France, it is Germany, it is England, it is, of course, the United States, and on and on and on. The crisis of legitimacy is anchored to the crisis of empire and imperialism. The promise of Trump was his promise to pull back as early as 2016 from wars of intervention and nation building to undermine and overthrow the entire neocon project, which went back, 50 years or more. That was his promise. That was even his promise in the 2024 election. And the breaking up of MAGA has to do with his betrayal of it. First on the question of Israel and Zionism and the genocide, but then on the bigger question of the Ukraine war and so on. If you want to understand Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have to understand that with all of their ideological flaws, at the heart of what they saw as the future of the United States was a retreat from war. That was the MAGA consensus. It's ironic that the claim that the MAGA consensus is based upon white supremacy. Most of the white people in MAGA are white supremacists at one level or another, but that was not what held it together. It was the opposition to war. And it was on that basis that one could rationally see a new alignment of forces, of left progressive anti-war forces and the MAGA movement. That was not out of the question and was on the table, right? It was on the table. And I know, I'll speak for myself. I was very transparent. And I said, I voted for Trump. Oh, Tony. I said, well, ask me why.
Mm.
You know, I knew what the Biden thing, I saw what the Jake Sullivans and that cabal were about. They were about the war in Ukraine. They provoked that. They were about the genocide in Gaza, and they were about an aggressive neocon policy, which they saw Trump in his first term as having weakened, if not undermined. Okay? So, you know, elections are just elections, and everybody has to make a tactical decision. Okay. Now, but of course, Trump, as they say, lies, or maybe he was captured. But nonetheless, he is what he is where he is, and we have to deal with it as it is. But then he's like a wrecking ball at the same time. You know, I remember we were talking about Scott Ritter and Steve Bannon one day here. And they said they were making the argument, Trump is a revolutionary, Trump is a revolutionary. And, you know, we disagreed with them and said, well, if you see revolution as destruction, and that's all it is, then I guess you could make that argument. But Trump has not had a positive program to do anything. In fact, he is a wrecking ball, even on his best days. Which, okay, we'll get back to that. How you assess it? What do you say? I mean, the guy is, you know, and he is a narcissist. He's throwed the fuck off. You know what I'm saying? Let's keep it 100. He thinks of himself in ways that hardly anybody else thinks of him. You know, isn't that? I don't think that's unfair to say. And if you listen to the Davos speech, I mean, there is no sense of reflection, self-reflection, even modesty. The man is out of control. And but anyway, he believes that he is bringing a new world order into existence. He alone. That he is a genius. That he has surpassed Napoleon, Lenin, Martin Luther King, whose holiday he wants to do away with. But even he has to face the unraveling of his political coalition. Which brings us to the Battle of Minneapolis, in a certain sense, two sides of the same coin. He unleashed armed gangs upon the people of Minneapolis. Now, a lot of people want to say this is fascism. I'm not going to say that. I don't think people really understand. You know, it's fashion. Oh God, it's fashion. This is part of the political. How would you say? Political alarmism of a quote left that has nothing to say to the masses of people. So it's fear tactics. Oh, we're in fascism. If we were in fascism, what would happen? What we would see in the streets of these cities would be even more devastating. It wouldn't just be Nicole or Renee Nicole Good or Alex Pretty. There would have been hundreds of people. Now, you know, I was talking to some people in the free school the other night, and I was telling them about the urban uprisings between the mid-'60s to 1970. I think I'm the only one here. I don't know, John, I don't know how you are, but I'm one of the few people in this room that saw that with my own eyes. You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't, you know, like Alex Pretty had a pistol. No, it was cats in high-rise projects with rifles shooting on the National Guard. And this went on for weeks. Cities burned. You know what I'm saying? This is significant, but it does not rise to that level of confrontation. So if this is fascism, then what was that? When they brought the National Guard and the Army and, you know, what was it, the one that they sent all over you know, some of the Marines and shit coming into Chicago, tanks, all that kind of stuff. So this is, but it is almost, you know, this thing of they kill white people, it must be fascism. You can kill all the black people you can find, but our democracy is failing. But what was that? So I'm saying, you know, this alarmism, this hysteria that passes for politics must be called out just for what it is. The positive thing is the people's fight back in Minneapolis. You know what I'm saying? So deep and so profound that the Trump administration is in retreat and in a certain amount of chaos, at least that part of it that deals with so-called homeland security and all, you know, if you were talking about fascism, they would have, you know, said, no, man, fuck it, we're going to kill you. If you move, we're going to kill you. Martial law and all of that. We've seen none of that. But that does not mean this is not politically dangerous, but it also means that the possibilities of moving forward are very profound at this time. Do y'all dig what I'm saying? It's not, you know, because you go back to the 60s, hey, man, it was like a throwdown. And, you know, 2 people, we're talking about 50 people killed, running battles in the street. And when you got to places like Detroit, that hard black proletariat, the way them people, Chicago, South Side and West Side, you understand? I mean, this is a nice thing compared to that. One thing I point out, we rocked the system, we didn't bring it down. Now, a lot of that had to do with the racial dynamic. They were able to unite white people behind law and order. You know what I'm saying? And then make this look like a black thing, black criminality and all that, which of course, a narrative that lasted up till today and the Clinton crime bill, black criminality. Well, what is the memory? You know, the memory is the urban uprisings. And all of this was, you know, black people that didn't want to work, welfare queens, all, you know, the whole anti-black white supremacist narrative. But then the other side of this is that the police forces were something different back then. You know, a lot of people, you know, want to be Black Panthers in 2025. Let's keep it 100. When Huey and Bobby and them started the Black Panther Party in Oakland, most times the police had sidearms and maybe a shotgun. It was the urban uprisings that militarized the police. You know, the police we're dealing with today are different than the police back in the 60s. It was more a civil force. It was more connected, though white supremacists, and most of the urban uprisings were triggered by acts of police brutality, but it was not what it is today. But then the other part, this is the contradictory thing, a more militarized police force, but Black people, because of the politics, the political movement, took over the large cities and thus appointed police chiefs who were more responsive to the Black community. So you remember in the 2020 election, abolish the police. Black people said, are you on the pipe? You know, no, you don't abolish. We want further and deeper reforms and community control of the police. In Philadelphia, about 35% of the police force is Black.
Mm.
They don't come from the suburbs. They don't come from white communities. They come from West Philly, West Oak Lane, you know, Germantown, North Philly. Ordinary Black working people, most just looking for a job. It's a different mentality than an all-white police force led by the likes of a RZA. So here you have a more highly militarized police force, but on the other side, a political system, flawed and very flawed, and you know, but nonetheless more responsive to Black people than what existed in the 60s. Part of the urban uprisings, by the way, was to take over political power in the cities. You know what I'm saying? There was a theory, I often tell you all about this, an ideology of which I was a part of, which said that the cities are the Black man's battleground. And we will take power in these cities through arms. You know what I'm saying? The masses of Black people, we will take these cities through the power of the ballot. You know what I'm saying? So when you hear this, we Black Panthers and we're gonna walk around with AKs and all that kind of bullshit. Hey, look, man, you know, cut the dramatics. That ain't nothing but weak bullshit drama of cats that don't nobody know and don't know how they got to Philadelphia. Don't nobody know you. So what you talking about? You know what I'm saying? And then you're gonna walk around with an AK in a community, children. You don't, you know, man. I mean, what? Come on, you see, come on, money. So either you dumb or you're agent provocateur, and I leave that for you to answer. But I've got to ask the question because I'm doing politics and ideology in this city. You tell me who you are, because I'm not certain. Y'all dig where I'm coming from? People say, well, you can't do that. Yes, I can. I got to check you at the door. But anyway, you see what I'm saying. But what Huey and Bobby and others did, they were not advocating what we were advocating here on the East Coast for armed guerrilla warfare. They were only arguing for policing the police and making sure the police recognize the constitutional rights of the ordinary Black citizen. That was it. You know what I'm saying? And then, of course, just when the Panthers morphed and split, it was a split between the Black Liberation Army and Huey, Elbridge Cleaver and Huey. And Huey said that, as you know, we've read it, that you cannot, it was in Revolutionary Suicide, that the Panther Party could not be known by the gun. Now, just a personal story. I was in Cuba with Huey when he and his family was in exile down there. This is in the 70s. We was having dinner. Very nice man, I have to tell you. Very nice cat, kind of a short cat, you know, a little taller than you, Blake. But, you know, he's built like a brick house because, you know, when he was in jail, he did his push-ups and shit. And a very, very handsome guy, too. And he spoke with a kind of high, he said, the American Communist Party was right. So what you mean? What he was saying, he said, the mass line. Anything that separates the party from the people is not revolutionary. He had come to that, but he had no way of carrying through with it. The party was split. in all kinds of different ways. They were young people. Oh, that they could have listened to William L. Patterson. They couldn't hear, which is often the problem of young people filled with passion and filled with desire. You know, and that's maybe it's an adolescent, young people, you know, a tendency only to see what you're doing. You know, nobody to say, hold it, dog, listen, man, I'm gonna tell you, you know, yada, 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 you know what I'm saying? They can't hear. And so I think by the time Huey could hear, it was too late for him. He was engulfed in a party that had fractured and all kinds of petty disputes. Oh God, that shit is, when you go into that pettiness, there's no way of resolving those kind of things, you know. They went into that pettiness and then they were infiltrated so highly and they had suffered. There was a psychological dimension, you know, for them to see Lil Bobby Hutton killed, for them to see Fred Hampton killed. That takes a toll. You might put up a strong face, but it's taking a toll. And it did. And then Eldridge, Cleaver, splitting the party, and just a whole number of things, but it was difficult. I'm gonna tell you from my own, it was difficult for them to hear. They just couldn't hear. And you know, that's why it's always, you know, an older person is not a smarter person. An older person just have a little bit more experience. And all you can say, consider this, homeboy, consider this young girl. You know, listen, I mean, I saw this is the way it looked to me then, yada, 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 yada. You know what I'm saying? But often they can't hear. You know, it might look good, you know, to stand up with all black and with an AK. But man, that AK don't mean shit. What they can bring down on your buns, this ain't 1966 in Oakland, California, where you have a shotgun and you just following the police around. It's a whole different thing. You know, and then if you're gonna wage that kind of struggle, you don't come up front and tell your opponent, I'm going to wait, and when I go out to, I'm gonna go out, if I'm out in Minneapolis, nobody would be killed because I got an AK-47. See, that's that either delusional or you're trying to perpetrate, but I don't want to go too much into that. But what was even plausible 60 years ago takes on a dimension of absurdity and bogusness and irresponsible performance today. And such behavior should be condemned and never taken seriously by anybody who claims to be a revolutionary and claims to care about the welfare of people. And I say, I guess I'm on a live stream and motherfuckers want to rush me and all that, but come on with it. That cannot be taken seriously. And what you will do at best is bring forces of repression down on ordinary people. You might think you look good. You might think you profiling, dog. Shit, I prefer the FOI. Discipline, you know, MGT. Yeah, discipline. Not no old, you know, I'm just all, no, well, you get my point. Now, but Minneapolis, a great battle at this time without secure or clear politics. from what I can see, ain't no revolutionaries in the mix. Now, I saw some elements that look like Antifa. I don't consider them revolutionaries at all. They too are drama queens, performers, you know what I'm saying? That ain't, but I saw some of them trying to, go back and forth with them Ice Cats, man, And I mean, like you going back and forth with them, and them cats, they're crazy to start with. And so if they fire on you, and which they could, I mean, what you gonna do then? But it was just that kind of, we gonna provoke and that make me revolutionary. And did you see me on my podcast? I was out there and yada, yada. Dog, you ain't did nothing. But that general strike, if it is true, the numbers are true what they said, it could be a turning point. It could be a turning point. We just don't know. What we would say, because there has to be a theoretical and ideological anchorage based in the American people's struggle for democracy and peace. And there is an American struggle for democracy and peace in the main. In its most recent and most profound iteration, issuing out of what they call the Black Civil Rights Movement, what we call the Black Freedom Movement, which makes the point that an American revolution in essence will be a Black revolution, which will resolve the Baldwinian paradox of whiteness. We began to see it with King. Heroic white people came forward, many were killed. Reject whiteness. It don't work. That's the problem. Baldwin, make America the last white nation. Another way to put it, make America the last nation that needs whiteness. Baldwin paradox. Whiteness and democracy don't fit. If you want democracy, you got to jettison whiteness. You can't see yourself as a white person, an adopted identity, and then say you're for democracy. But then there's James Lawson. We were talking about this the other night. When James Lawson came to Philadelphia, and then when I listened, and I guess everybody's been listening to a lot of his speeches, although in the 50s and 60s, he and his colleagues in Nashville called themselves American Gandhians. In 2019, here in Philadelphia, he was trying to rediscover and discover Martin Luther King. Isn't that so? He and King were like that. In a lot of ways, he instructed King in Gandhi's approach. But of course, they made a new synthesis: nonviolent direct action, political mobilization, win the people to resistance. Of course, a general strike is a nonviolent action, a boycott is the same. Lawson was trying to rediscover or discover Martin Luther King. He was, to put it another way, he was obsessed with King. What is the meaning of King? Which is us, really. Just a couple things I just want to hit on. Lawson is very instructive for us. You know, in a time where so much is going on and people can choose to go in so many different directions, where and how you choose to fight is also a moral question, a question of your understanding of history and the history of struggle. Where and how you choose to fight. In other words, you know, I know a lot of people think being a revolutionary is to follow whatever says it is revolutionary. You know what I'm saying? That is not true. A revolutionary takes a stance, not inflexibly, not dogmatically, but you must take a stance. That stance must be anchored to a historical experience. The reason I mention the failure of the communist parties of Western Europe is that we have an opposite experience, a richer experience, even though we didn't realize it was. We thought that a big communist party was, or the armed struggle, let us say, in Guinea-Bissau, which was not all that much armed, but you know, that's what we looked to. When right in front of us was the future working itself out. That history, anchored to the Black proletariat, was, is, and shall forever be the future of this country. It is upon this foundation that the entire working class, the entire democratic masses must unite. It is the richness of that moment. And like James Lawson, what does it mean? And how shall we apply it in the 21st century? That's all he talked about. That's all he talked about. It wasn't Gandhi, it was King.
That was a great point. That's a really great point.
Oh yeah. You saw it. You were here. There will be great marches. I'm certain that the liberal bourgeoisie and the nonprofits are already organizing to make the No Kings March in March one of the largest, quote, civil rights marches. Let me get one thing straight. See, this is where the civil rights branding gets, it is the Black freedom movement. You know what I'm saying? You could say, well, I'm a civil rights activist. You know, like Zionists are very good at this. Like the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's not about the South, it's not about poverty. It's about Zionism. You know, so they'll say, oh, we're leading the civil rights movement. So then no Black people there. So you get an All Kings March. This is the civil rights movement, but ain't no Black people in it. You know what I'm saying? So that has to be accounted. Are we talking about a, quote, new civil rights movement? Or are we talking about another iteration of the Black freedom movement, which itself goes back to Reconstruction and its defeat? Okay, I'm just, you get my point. I just want to bring two things, the Baldwin paradox and the Baldwin solution. James Baldwin. Well, we're in the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. We already have set up a committee to begin to organize our efforts. Jeremiah and I met and discussed the Declaration. I think we have worked out a framework, a declaration of resistance and purpose, maybe we could call it, but I'm not certain. We want to keep it brief, but we want it to have the right language and the right formulations for this time. And I guess at the end of the day, we cannot go forward without Martin Luther King Jr. And I think we will say unapologetically that if there's to be a new American nation, King will be its father. In some ways, we want this declaration, Jerry and I talked about it, to some ways, though not, not artificial, a discussion between Jefferson and King. The first American Revolution and the fourth American Revolution. It will be the King of James Lawson. It will have to acknowledge the gift of Black people, which is the beautiful and beloved struggle. And this is a gift. This is a gift to the American people that exceeds anything that the, quote, founding fathers could have done. Now, we're not nihilists, so we're not going to take this, oh, it wasn't no revolution, it was a counter. No, we're not into that bullshit. It's fake. It was a revolution. The question is the essence of it. The other thing, we set up a committee, and April 3rd and 4th will be the first event, which, we're trying to figure it out. Emily and I have been rapping about, in the committee, been rapping about this. Shall we memorialize King's anti-Vietnam War speech, or should it be to memorialize King on the day of his assassination? Well, we can do both, but, all of these celebrations of King have not memorialized, honored, or grieved him. And in grieving his assassination, we grieve it as an irreplaceable loss to the American people. That is what we call for grieving. The loss to the American people of a great figure, a great visionary, and a great revolutionary. And so I think maybe, we can work with that. Of course, all of, the Vietnam speech is certainly integrated into it, the letter from a Birmingham jail. But to memorialize him and the gift that Black people gave to the nation through this great man and the great movement will be a way to fight in this 250th anniversary against all this flag waving and bullshit and celebration of whiteness. That's what Trump is going to try to do. This shit ain't going to fly. He don't even know how to do what he's trying to do. But anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
One thing that, going back to where you'd started with the Davos conference or Davos summit, one of the things that I thought was very interesting about the Ezra Klein conversation with Adam Tooze, I guess it's two things, one of which is that Tooze is, I think, for me, one of the more interesting public intellectuals right now, in part because he's very obsessed with China and this question of China and what does China mean for modernity and world history. And Tooze's argument is essentially that, and it ties in with some of our discussions of like Sven Beckert, for example, but that the entire history of the Industrial Revolution for him is a prehistory to China, like modern China today. and what is happening in China, both in terms of scale, but also in terms of quality, I think. And you can tell that Klein is not really able to digest this. And it's basically like, you sound like you're on drugs or something, kind of trying to write it off. But I think the other, actually what I also found kind of profound about Choose is that, because that interview starts with Ezra Klein, citing the famous Gramsci quote of the old world is dying, new struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters, or now is the time when morbid symptoms appear, all that, which many people have brought up. And what Two's responds with is to say, why do we assume that there will be a new world order after this one?
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting part. I raise it because in the end, Two's is still kind of operating within, you could say, a civilizational logic, worldview, epistemology, where he can't really imagine, Two's can't really imagine a world order, quote unquote, beyond one that is essentially anchored by and structured by like white civilization, I think. It's kind of how I read it. Or it's like, another way to read it though would be that whatever comes next in the history of humankind will be so different that it's basically irrecognizable from the current standpoint of the past several hundred years of history. And in Free School, we've talked about this as the movement from an age of Europe to an age of humanity. I just thought that was interesting that it's like, he was saying that like, we can't even assume that there would be quote unquote a world order after this one, because he was like, the idea of an interregnum assumes that there's a new regnum, a new ruling kind of sphere of rule that comes after this. And I think I agree with what you were saying, that Trump is contradictory in that sense, where he is tearing down a lot. And a lot of the substance of the conversations has been like, whether it's Carney or other people, basically recognizing that the old order of, especially like the rules, the quote unquote rules-based international order that has been led by the United States, in some ways almost like created the conditions for its own rupture, because it was like increasingly the United States was like weaponized, like the way that you talk about it, it's like weaponizing what they call the deplumbing of the international like kind of financial architecture that they had set up. And it didn't start with Trump. And in many ways, Trump was the one to make it more overt. And I think that's what is forcing essentially like these middle power Western countries to be, for the first time, like actually truly afraid of the United States. But yeah, so I don't know. I was just thinking about that in relation to what you're saying. And then with Minneapolis, I think part of what's interesting is both the general strike that happened, but a lot of what I've been reading about and listening to is like, what did the mass mobilization of like these different neighborhoods of people look like? And a lot of it was basically like these neighborhood community patrols that were set up to, in some ways, almost on the like the original Black Panther way, to police ICE, to monitor ICE. And there's like all these articles kind of heroizing like these ordinary Minnesotans who have like the whistles and all that stuff. But interestingly, what I was reading is that a lot of the foundation for those neighborhood organizations and like kind of informal networks in Minneapolis were from the wake of the 2020 like George Floyd protests. But actually it was because part of it was the response to the basically like the riots that happened in Minneapolis at the time with George Floyd. And so I don't know, I do think that it's I just feel like part of it is like, it is very chaotic moment.
Mhm.
And actually, Neri and I were talking about this, but I think whether it's Minneapolis or I also saw that there was, a lot of protests happening in like the West Coast now with Los Angeles and San Francisco, basically within the past day. I think that actually it reminds me of how I felt prior to the encampments for Gaza that emerged a year or two ago. And I don't know what form it's going to take, but I do think that it feels like something like the encampments will happen again. It's just that it's unclear like what it's going to be. And I think in some ways part of what's so fascinating about it is that like it's ostensibly about immigration, but I don't think anyone really thinks that it's about immigration.
No.
And but that I think is going to have to be one of the ideological questions that's actually worked out in real time among people. But yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? I just, because, I listened to the Ezra Klein and Adam Tooze, and, Adam Tooze is so far ahead of,
Yeah.
so much more intelligent.
Mhm.
But he, like he said, he's studying Chinese,
Mhm.
recognizing
Mhm.
that China. See, here's what this is what it was. See, they want to talk about China, a nation,
Mhm.
but they don't want to talk about this is a movement of the global South, as they call it.
Mhm.
It's more than China.
Mhm.
It's China in concert
Mhm.
with a larger movement against neocolonialism.
Mhm.
But of course, I mean, he's right. The achievements of China are spectacular, and he says it never been done in human history,
Mhm.
and it is spectacular.
Mhm. Well, because I think part of the limitation of someone like Tooze is that at the end of the day, he is by training like an economist, like an
Yes.
economic historian.
Yes, yes.
And so
yes.
his rubric for even evaluating anything is essentially like how many electric vehicles is China producing?
Yeah, right.
How many miles, like tens of thousands of miles of railway did they build in the past 20, 30 years? Like how many new houses have been built in China?
Or how many solar panels?
How many solar panels?
And he said, if I might just interrupt,
Mhm.
this, that China has produced enough solar panels
Mhm.
to solve the energy and climate problems for the entire world.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. And I think all of that stuff like is huge. Like I think it is like a landmark kind of moment in humanity. But I think it's at the same time true that using that as the primary frame of reference for even placing China in the history of the world,
Yes.
like modern China in the history of the world, I think it does miss out on like what you were talking about, like this wider world movement that emerged out of especially like the anti-colonial struggles, the Second World War, the Bandung movement, and China sees itself as part of basically fulfilling that history, as Alice wrote about in her recent essay as well. And yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's like part of the like limitation too is that whether it's Tooze or like Carney, right? Their thesis about what this emerging world order might be is essentially like a order dominated by quote unquote great powers and then middle powers and then smaller nations. And I think when you have that worldview, it is basically like America versus Russia versus China. And I don't think that that's really how China sees itself, or even Russia. And again, it misses out on like that entire like basically that movement of the 20th century and what it really represented, which is not about basically like China asserting itself as like a hegemon, but really is. I don't know. I feel like Alice, you could speak more to it.
I appreciated how like you had framed essentially starting with Davos, but also the crisis of white civilization, and also laying out like what that exactly, how that had formed, and then also what it means. Because a basis of white civilization is also this tie to what is reality and what is fiction. Like, is white supremacy a fiction? And how long can it be sustained? Which is that essentially that the white world is superior to the rest of the world. And I think that's also the question that is before us too. I remember this, what you had said before, which is, he who the gods wish to destroy, make mad first. And so amidst where, you know, there isn't, essentially the white world can no longer sustain this fiction of white supremacy being, you know, the most economically forward, the most technologically advanced, culturally more civilized. As the world is emerging and developing, how long can they sustain this fiction of white supremacy? But also, how long can the people themselves continue to essentially compromise with this vision, or essentially, compromise with this vision, and especially white people, because essentially, like as you guys were developing the declaration, I remember we were looking at the John Brown Declaration as well.
Yeah.
And what had really stood out is also what John Brown states, as in the people will no longer serve as slaves. And because it takes people also to sustain this empire, to not resist. And so the question before is, one, will all of these, I guess, European nations, like, how will they fall? Will they resist or continue to buy into the fiction of white supremacy? And I think that's what China represents, or China and the rest of, like, China represents too. It's not only the fact that they're creating all these technological advancements or building infrastructure, so forth. I think one is that it's a non-white nation. And there's the anger of how is it that these Chinese people are surpassing us? And it challenges that myth of white supremacy. And then also the fact that China is not isolated. The rest of the world is seeing that there's an alternative to white supremacy and neocolonialism, where advances of the human being, and in all its dimensions, economically, politically, and civilizationally, do not have to be on the basis of war and oppression.
Yep.
And that's the fiction too of what you were describing of the European nations, which is economic prosperity will be based upon the fact of silence and war, whereas China is not, and falling in line. Whereas it's not just that China's producing solar panels, China's also standing up to the rules-based order. And also representing the rest of the world, becoming conscious of that alternative, which is that nations can rise not upon the exploitation of others.
No, I just wanted to add that I do think that part of what is happening right now in the US is it's like forcing the memory of the Black freedom movement, the Third American Revolution, into people's consciousness.
It is.
And in a way that I don't think I've seen before.
Absolutely.
And actually, even Two's had this interesting part in the interview where he says, American politics, and by which he means kind of the ruling elite and what we call the center of American politics, is in its deep fabric so static, so afraid of change, you could say traumatized by the last big change, which was, as he says, the quote unquote, the civil rights movement of the 60s. Whereas the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, governs, it continuously reinvents what the party is and how it governs. And he basically, Adam Tooze describes it, the Communist Party of China has this kind of churning innovation around what he calls the cell structure of governance that goes down into basically the household level of how China is governed. But I just thought that was really interesting that, like, for Tooze, even like a European who I guess is at Columbia University, but it's like for Americans and for the rest of the world, it's like you have to go straight to the Third American Revolution as the last great real moment of change in American society. But then contrasting that with basically how, like, I just like that it traumatized the ruling elite. And it made them, that has created so much of the inertness, like both the inertness and the repression of the American state. And that contrasting with China, he's like, there's this continual reinvention of even what the Communist Party of China is, how it governs, its rootedness in the people.
You know, just apropos what you just said, I was listening to, I think, Morning Joe, you know, which I listen to, but they had this guy, Chris Hayes, who has another show, and they were talking about Minneapolis. And he brought up Taylor Branch's first volume, Parting the Waters, and the Montgomery bus boycott. As, you know, it's quite, I find it, but I'll just.
What did he say about it?
Well, he just quickly, he said that what he was saying is kind of what Tooze was saying. This is the model of social change, but they get the model wrong because they see it as reauthorizing the liberals, as giving, and see, they take the moral framework to be a liberal framework, whereas the moral framework in the civil rights or Black movement was the revolutionary imperative, the moral and the revolutionary. But what they want, and it's their fictionalized, they see the moral as the liberal, you know, against the authoritarian. But King and them, and this is what, by the way, James Lawson, what the whole time he was here, the whole time was this question of what is the meaning of the nonviolent movement, and what is the meaning of revolutionary, and even the democratic seizure of state power. I mean, this is what we were talking about. But I think, you know, the liberals want a civil rights, just like they've debased King. They want a civil rights movement without revolutionary and popular dynamics. They want the civil without revolutionaries, without the Diane Nashes and people prepared to die. You know.
I just wanted to add something on King that's a different perspective. I'm in Generation X. So, between people born between 71 and 1980. So, but my perspective is one of which, as an African American, I have known people who were actually in civil rights in Alabama. And one perspective on King that people don't know, he was in the religious community of Atlanta and Alabama. A lot of the ministers at that time did not like him. Because what he had done is, when he went to Boston University, he adopted the Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence. And a lot of them felt that they were more on the Booker T. Washington philosophy of, we need to go along to get along because we're a minority in this country. The white people can kill a lot of us. Because even now, the Black American population is like 13%. The reason why ICE has been formulated, because when the Republicans looked at the demographics of California and Texas, up to 40% of those populations are Hispanic, and they don't understand them from a cultural point of view. Who are these people? How will they vote? And if they get into a voting block, they can decide like they can decide like a whole election, like in terms of nationally and locally.
Mm-hmm.
So the frustration is the Hispanics have been crossing the border for many decades because they were migrant farm workers. This is not anything new. There's always been illegal Hispanics here. But the problem now is they have so many of them, they don't know what they would do if they get into a collective mindset and how they will vote. So therefore, they want to put them in check, get them out and put force on them and say, look, if you're not here legally, we're going to get you out quickly, even if they haven't committed a crime. Because a lot of these people that are stopping, these people are on their way to work, meaning that you're blocking somebody's car, somebody can't get to work and so forth, and they're pulling people out of cars and so forth. A lot of the ICE people who are recruited, these are people who they haven't done any background checks on a lot of these people. A lot of them only have a high school diploma, and a lot of them are angry. They have some of these white men have anger issues, meaning that they might have been in the military, they might have been kicked out, or they might have been in the police academy, they got kicked out because they didn't fit a psychological profile. So I'm saying, you don't know who these people are. Like the sheriff said, you don't walk around with masks on and pulling people out of cars. That's not what law enforcement is supposed to be. But the problem is they want to keep the Hispanic population in check. They want to say, look, we can get you out quickly.
Yeah.
And even though that they had been here a long time and they've been working as migrant workers, most of the work that's still on farms in the Southwest is done by illegal Hispanics. They've been doing it for a long time. And so parts of California and New Mexico, Arizona, those were parts of Mexico, meaning that the Americans fought the Spanish to get those territories. So when they cross the border, they feel like they're a part of Mexico. I mean, they don't feel like they're in a different country. So what I'm saying is like, this is a Democrat, this is based on the demographics. They're afraid of the demographics changing. That's why they want to get into the gerrymandering in California and Texas, because they don't want these populations to overcome them if they get into a tight election. The other thing is, there's an economist named Claude Anderson and Sandy Darity. They're looking at it's the economic situation that is causing the uproar now, because the monetary structure is breaking down. Because the BRIC nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, they are getting more economic markets than the Americans or the West are, especially the Chinese. Chinese are in Africa. We build an infrastructure in Africa right now, and a lot of those African nations, they're using what the Chinese are starting to do now is they're saying to the countries they're in South America, we want you to exchange in our currency. Don't use the American dollar. So right now, the American dollar is the reserve currency at the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. They determine what these currencies are worth around the world. So right now, the euro is worth more than the dollar. If you go to Europe and you exchange your dollars, you're going to get less back. So right now, the Chinese currency is at like a quarter of what the dollar is worth. But if the Chinese get into more markets and their currency increases, and they influence the IMF to put their reserve currency up, then the dollar crashes, then America will go into like a third world state. So all I'm saying is that this is what's going on now. Now with the whole thing with the religious and the MAGA, the white Christian nationalism, this whole thing with Charlie Kirk and these other people, America is really spiritually lost. You know, a lot of people are lost. A lot of people got mental problems. That's the reason why you see so much drug abuse going on, because a lot of these cartels, they're selling these drugs all over the world, but these other countries don't consume drugs like the Americans do. Like they're over in Asia, these drugs are over there, but they consume the drugs so much over here. So because the people are a spiritual crisis, America's in a spiritual crisis. So what is eventually going to happen is, because the deficit is at 38 trillion and is growing, this is unsustainable for a first world economy. So what they have to do is they have to go into a digital global currency.
Mm.
You know, this is why Trump is with this Bitcoin. He's even got his own Bitcoin now because he knows that they have to go into this global currency situation. The national deficit is unsustainable. Right now, the interest on the debt is greater than the whole defense budget.
Yeah.
You know, this is what Elon Musk was saying. This is not fixable. You can't fix this now. So all I'm saying is that once they go into a digital global currency, then you see a new world order situation happen in which there's a more of a global government happening. And because of the Western world is in such a spiritual crisis, you will see the MAGA white Christian nationalism say we want to lower the bar between church and state, meaning that what the state does, what the church can determine what the state will do. This is what the Catholics did in the Middle Ages, where the Pope and the Vatican could determine what national policy was. I mean, personally, if you're a person that's transgender or gay or lesbian, whatever, you choose to do that, but then the church will say, well, that's a sin. But then the state will say, well, we'll marry these people. But then the church will say, well, we won't do it. But then the church is influencing what the state is saying. Because the state is saying that these people pay taxes, these people are citizens, they do what they want. But at the same time, the church is saying, according to the Bible, this is a sin. You can be, this person go to hell for this. So therefore, the church is influencing what the state is saying. So what the white Christian nationalists want to do, they want to say, we want to take that bar down, take it completely down where the church can influence state affairs. So that's when they get into like a globalized religion type thing, where you get the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican, because the Vatican really is a nation state unto itself, meaning that the Vatican has diplomats, they have a government there. So if the Vatican gets into the G8 and they have influence on global policy, then the Pope is elevated as he was in the Middle Ages. Where the Pope in the Middle Ages, the Pope was like a king.
Yeah.
He could decide wars and so forth. And this is what they're moving towards. Because really the Protestant church, even though we're in the church, the Protestant church is still under the authority of the Catholic Church. The only religion that is outside of Christianity is Islam, and probably Mormonism is a religion unto itself. But Islam is the main detriment to the Catholic Church having ultimate authority over all religious affairs. Because the Catholics can keep the Protestants in check because they came out, because the Protestantism came out of the Catholics.
Can I ask you a question, John, if you don't mind? Do you see white people, let's in the United States, as a unified whole?
No, what whiteness is a privilege that is given to you and allows you full access in society. You have people that have come into America, like when the Irish came and the Jews came and the Italians came. They were not considered to be white when they first came into America in the early 20th century. They were gradually grafted into whiteness. Now the Jews, a lot of people did not like the Jews for a long time because the Jews denied Christ. See, this whole thing with white Protestantism and Jesus Christ and so forth, the Jews denied Christ and they seemed to have their own culture. And then it was this whole thing that people believed the Jews were Shylocks and they were robbing people and doing dishonest stuff. And they were going against the Christians and they were in cabals where they were controlling industries and they were doing it to the detriment of white Christians. So that's why Nazi Germany could form up the way it was because
What percent, if you were to estimate, what percentage of white people are rejecting or have rejected a white identity?
No, what you have right out here now is white privilege. If they are white or they have white privilege, they believe that they have full access to the society, that the society's on their side. It's like they had a book come out called Caste, where the woman's last name is Roberson. You know, in India, you have the caste system, right? Where you have certain people who are the Brahmins, they're on top, and then you have the Dalits, they're at the bottom, and they do all the bad jobs or whatever. So the blacks are like the Dalits of America, and as a collective, even you have a few that get up there with white people, but very few. So, but what it is now is that because you have this structure, the way it's structured, the way the society is structured, the really elite whites are more like social Darwinists, meaning they believe that the black African is really a subhuman type person. And that's the reason why when Hitler first came on the scene during World War II, he was supported by white industrialists like Henry Ford, and these people were giving him money because he was talking social Darwinism. He was saying, if we don't have white people in the world, what's going to happen to the world? We need white people. And then when these other people came along, like Pat Buchanan and Ronald Reagan in the 80s, he was saying this through the Heritage Foundation. Pat Buchanan was saying the same thing. He was saying that if we lose the white majority, this country will fall into a third world state.
But that's him.
And
But see, this is just, and then I just want to, and then go on. But see, I think it's worth looking at that part of the white population that has said either we don't accept the predatory, aggressive definition of whiteness, or we reject whiteness altogether.
Right.
You know, and I think that this is why, you know, the Battle of Minneapolis has to be looked at, because because see, it wasn't the Somalis or the Hispanics that confronted ICE. It was white people.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And they killed white people for doing that.
Right.
I think this is quite significant. I think, you know, even I take Renee Nicole Good in particular, because her identity, her quote, white identity, was complicated by her sexual agenda identity.
Right.
You know, I think it is and I felt, without knowing a lot about, she had been married twice. She had, I think, 2 children in heterosexual marriages, and then she marries a woman.
Right.
Now, I asked myself, what was Renee Nicole Good saying about her life and about whiteness? And I think she was rejecting white normality.
Well, even if she's a lesbian, the white male officer or whatever, ICE officer, I don't know if he knew what her sexuality was or not, but at the same time,
but he didn't have to.
There's this whole thing with this paternalistic nature among alpha white men. That's the reason why Trump appeals to them so much, because it's this paternalism. You know what I'm saying? But it's this thing is what the MAGA and the white Christian nationalism, their agenda is take down that wall between church and state. Let the church dictate what the state is doing in terms of a lot of these issues with the LGBTQ or whatever. Let them get into these affairs, because we are in a spiritual crisis. We have these white males are taking drugs at an increasing rate. You have a lot of them are disaffected. They don't want to do nothing. And so therefore we're losing ourselves if we don't get back to some type of spiritual background. We're going to lose our youth. And this is why this appeal to Charlie Kirk and things that he was saying, because it's this move to take down the wall between church and state. Once they do that, then the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church, which has control over all of Protestantism, really. The only thing that's outside of them is the Mormons and the Muslims. And right now, the Pope has a Muslim prayer room in the Vatican. He's studying Islam. And he also has a rabbi that he confers with, and he studies the Jewish people too. So I'm saying they're trying to get to a globalized religious movement where they can bring people in spiritually, because they realize technology and a lot of these other things is putting people in a spiritual crisis. They don't know the way things might go. They're not sure, because now I saw on 60 Minutes, these robots can do jobs like people, like factory jobs. They got these robots, like if you working for UPS or FedEx, the robot can do jobs just like a human. And in terms of what this Elon Musk was saying is that in terms of the autonomous vehicles, he was saying, I can do this right now. I can run a bus, I can run a truck, I can run a taxi cab. Out in California, they got the Waymo taxis drive themselves.
Oh, yeah.
So he's saying, so what is this going to do to the transportation industry? People, they were saying a certain percentage of people make their living off driving vehicles, transportation. This is going to wipe out whole industries. And then you have the other guy saying, if you have people with low skill sets in the economy and their job is wiped out, then we may have to pay them through a universal basic income because they may be too old to be retrained for something else. And that's why this push across the world is for this artificial intelligence, because this will determine whether they get the globalized currency in place. Once they get the globalized currency in place, then America can wipe out its debt, and its debt can be translated across internationally, and they don't have to worry about going bankrupt. Because right now, a lot of the inflationary things that's happening now, I think it's because of the weakening of the American dollar. I think what the Treasury Department is not really telling you is the dollar is weakening in value, and that's the reason why you're seeing certain inflationary things happen. That's my own opinion, but they won't tell you that. But then with Trump with Greenland, he knows that the Russians and the Chinese may come through the Bering Strait to invade. That's the reason why they want the Arctic Pole, so they can put those missile defense systems up and they can knock down missiles in case they try to come through the Arctic poles to invade America. But the main, I think, two important economists to study now is this guy. His last name is Diallo, Diallo. He wrote a book called How Big Countries Go Broke. He's looking at the big cycle of the monetary structure breaking down. And then the other guy is Claude Anderson, who is an African-American economist. And he talks about how the Black American community has really collapsed from within. And that what the boys talked about, the talented 10th, was supposed to uplift the collective of the Black community, but it didn't happen because of the rugged individualism of the Black elite. They believed in what the European was saying, everybody goes for themselves. And then there's a cultural breakdown there where the Blacks, Americans, don't have a collective cultural experience like the Chinese or the Arabs or the East Indians. They don't have that collective culture where you have a religion, a language, and so forth, and these other things in place. That's the reason why the Nation of Islam was so appealing to a lot of Black people back in the 40s and the 50s, because it gave the Black who were in the proletariat, it gave them some type of discipline. Because that ghetto life is one in which it's like survival of the fittest. And there's like no structure to that. So therefore, a lot of the Black people look to the Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. It gave them structure in their life. And that's why a lot of them, Elijah Muhammad was telling them, become Muslims because you get more structure, more discipline in your life. Because the way they were living, it was like they were doing according to what the white man told them to do. And then if they went back to their community, if they had a little bit of money, they might get robbed, they might get beat up, whatever. It was like people fighting each other all the time. It was this black on black violence all the time. So therefore, and plus you have this extreme lack of self-esteem in Black people. Black people really look to white people as like gods or whatever. I mean, they really worship white people subconsciously, because when you talk about Reconstruction, and Black Reconstruction is an important book by Du Bois, but what happened was Grant was the president who was under the Reconstruction effort. But what happened was the KKK came in and they disrupted that because they did not want the newly freed slaves in the economy. They didn't want to be competing with them. They did not, and this is the same dynamic you're seeing with the Latinos. they're saying we don't want these people in the economy. We don't want to compete with these people, especially if they're not here legally, even though a lot of them have not been here legally for a long time. But now they're just saying that we don't want them here now because there's too many of them. Because when we look at the Southwest, they're almost half the population. And we don't understand them culturally, who they are and the way they may go. So therefore, this is about economic competition. And what Claude Anderson brings up is that when you look at who is white and who is non-white, it's about competition for economic resources.
John, let me let Samir come in.
Sorry.
That's
I
okay.
know I want to respond to some things because you explained something to me as a Muslim because I grew up and went to school on the main line, and there were a lot of Jews and WASPs and
Right.
Catholics.
Right.
And one year our school moved into a Catholic school, and I was carpooling with a Catholic family, and they're talking about how they pulled all the crosses off because the Jewish mothers made a big deal about it.
Right.
And so I never understood the dynamic there. So thank you for clarifying that. Even
Oh,
though
yeah.
it was simple,
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't understand as a Muslim. And you're right. So the Islamic religion, you have to pray 5 times a day.
Right,
So it is
right.
a very time-oriented, a rhythmic sort of religion
Right.
where the time, and then Ramadan is coming. But I also wanted to talk about what you said about the Hispanic population
Right.
and the ICE. I think that there's more to it. And Trump has been really reacting to things,
Right.
like with the Venezuela thing. Susan Wiles had that interview with Vanity Fair, and all his cabinet had this
Right.
interview. It looked really terrible. And I guess Susan Wiles and JD Vance had been keeping Trump in line because ever since then, he's just been hanging out with Marco Rubio and being the worst kind of neocon.
Right.
And so Trump goes into Venezuela. A lot of people think it's for the oil, but actually a lot of that oil, it can't be sold to Russia and Cuba. So they have to go to the legitimate market to buy the oil. So it actually reduces the supply for oil in the worldwide market. A lot of what Trump was doing was because of the 10-year American bond and the strength of the dollar, like you were saying. But one thing I disagreed with was that Trump has not been cracking down or sending ICE into places like California or Texas or
New York City.
Nevada or New York. He's been targeting Minnesota and other places. He's been targeting big blue cities.
Right.
And it seems like he's narcissistically punishing his political enemies like Tim Walz or whoever, because he's made a deal with big agro industry not to arrest those illegals who work for restaurants or for agro industry, because those industries will collapse.
Right.
And I also think that I door knocked with the AFL-CIO in 2016, and I knocked on a lot of Hispanic doors, and a lot of them were very pro-Catholic or working class and conservative values, and they were not, this time bomb that some people have expected. I don't think that they are the time bomb. I mean, I agree that that's the narrative.
Right.
What kind of time bomb?
The demographic time bomb, where the Hispanics will come and they'll vote. They'll follow in. This is after Obama was elected, and the Obama coalition included all these African Americans and Hispanics and liberal whites, and the Democrats sort of took their base for granted because they're like, "Oh, we're gonna win because all these Hispanic people are coming and having babies, and we support them." And in my experience, there's been no one more anti-immigration than an immigrant who's just recently made it. And the term "WAP" without papers used to mean the Italian.
What is it? Say that again.
WAP without papers used to mean the Italian Americans who came in through Ellis Island.
Right.
And I guess what I was gonna point out is this whitening process, like Ellis Island. You come, you change your name, or you go through this whatever Ellis Island is. Or the transcendental Ellis Island, I'll call it.
Right.
Is happening to Hispanics as well. And I would argue it's even happening to Indians and Africans. And I think that whiteness has reached so many contradictions because, for example, the Jewish community used to be not considered white.
Right.
And they've made inroads because now, Israel and America have this special relationship. And ever since Israel became a neo-colony, that was sort of Israeli Americans, Jews, their way into American society to say, oh no, we're a freedom-loving people and we're not for the third world. And I think that a lot of Pakistanis, because I'm Pakistani myself, I think a lot of Pakistanis have also attempted to be like that, like, Pakistan is America's greatest ally, or in their head, or, I think this, back to your point about Putin or Iranians, I think
Right.
Iranians want to assimilate into whiteness too.
Right.
They
Assimilate.
want to assimilate,
Right.
even though Israel is slapping the shit out of them, they want to assimilate into the Western economy.
Right. Right.
And Russia has never broken relationships with Israel. Has a very close relationship with
Right.
Israel. So I do agree that this is what more explains this than an economic relationship.
Right.
Oh, we just make money, is an aspiration to whiteness. And when you ask people on the left, like for instance, when you ask people on the left, oh, can you change your gender identity? That's
Right.
totally okay. That's something that we all accept. But if you ask them, can you change their racial identity? They become very defensive. And even though there's a genetic mark for gender, but there is no genetic marker for race.
Right.
It's like the left is trying to reinscribe the racial color line.
So they have what?
The left is trying to reinscribe, or what we call the left in America
Right.
is hyper focused on race to make it permanent, even though there are these historical processes that are, So basically, what I've tried to describe is that race is not something that's set in concrete or stone or human nature, but it's something that's developing and evolving before our eyes. And we can go back in the past and say, oh, Irish and Jews, they weren't white. Now they are. How did that happen? And we can see it today with people of even darker skin tone.
Right.
Like I grew up in Villanova. I grew up in a whitewashed community. I was educated. How would you describe it? I was educated to be socialized, to be white. How long could this continue? And I think Doc, you were bringing up, oh well, did Renee Good reject that? I don't even. Maybe she was just living with a woman because she was co-parenting and just to make rent. That's still a rejection of what you were saying, marriage in the state. It's still a rejection of the state.
Right.
What we were saying earlier about what is whiteness, is it a privilege? I don't really like that language. It's an identity, and it's one that's conferred a lot of power to the state, because a white person can call the police and say, I'm being robbed, I'm being assaulted. This black man's following me into his apartment. He has a key too, but he's still following me. And
Well, I just want to add to what you're saying about whiteness not being a privilege. I would say what the really white elites are the WASP who came on the Mayflower, who came down on Plymouth Rock. These are the people who live in New England, who have 8 generations of their family went to Harvard and so forth. These are the white people you don't see. And they're the original white people. The other white people came later, but what the white elites, like at the Heritage Foundation or these other think tanks, what they look at demographic data. They look at the Asian pop, and what Claude Anderson is an economist, which is one of the best economists to read right now, because really we're in an economic transition right now, and the monetary order we have is breaking down. So therefore, there's a competition for resources. So the elites are going to look at who gets the resources, who doesn't. When they look at these other groups like your group, the Asian, South Asian or whatever, they say they're looking at their income data, their educational data. They're saying their income data is very high, it's higher than Caucasian. Their educational attainment data is higher than Caucasian. They're a model minority. They need to be here. When they look at these other groups, they say these people are not producing at the same level. When they look at the Black American group, they say the higher percentage of them, disproportionate number of them are on public assistance. They're incarcerated. They are a drain on us. So they have a Darwinistic viewpoint of people. They say who should be here, who shouldn't be here. That's why when Trump, when he first ran for president, he said, I don't want these Mexicans in here because they're raping people, they're committing crime. I don't know who these people are. We need to get them out. So therefore, their thing is, I want people here who are going to benefit the society. If they're not here to benefit us, or if they're a drain on us, we're going to get them out. And this is the whole thing with MAGA and Trump. It's like people who are not a benefit to us, we need to get rid of them. And
I just want to say one last thing.
Right.
That Doc brought up that the Plessy v. Ferguson case, to answer your question.
Right.
Whiteness is access to property. I put it a little differently. Whiteness is property.
Right.
Whiteness is access to property. So all these other groups are coming and saying,
Right.
I deserve a piece of that.
Right. But the whole thing is what happens to the Asian population. If they are assimilated into whiteness, they become white adjacent people, meaning that they are not white, but they're given white privilege. White privilege is different than actually being white. You can have white privilege, and say if a Black person goes against you and they're just like a city worker and you're a South Asian doctor or whatever, you have white privilege, meaning that if you go to court, the judge is going to look at you and listen to your testimony and say, you are a model person in society, you are white adjacent. So I'm going to go against this Black guy. If he does, let's say he robs you or something, I'm going to throw the book at him because he is a bottom caste in this society. And that's the way it runs. You know what I mean? And so that's what I'm saying. Like, and that's why certain Asian groups came here and they probably looked on the Black people and they said, well, these people are like pariahs or whatever. So they may have adopted the same philosophy that white people had as far as what Black people were, but they didn't understand the full social dynamic that was happening with them. You know.
I just wanted to add that it does. Part of how I think we are, like what we are confronting though, is what looks like could be basically a civil war between white people. Like that's part of what I think is happening with this whole Trump thing, is even on the world stage, it's like he's turning the guns against Europe. Like he's turning the gun, or like appears to be turning the guns against, Greenland of all places. And I know that there's a lot of geopolitical, economic, whatever, like underlying that, but I think what we were saying with Minneapolis is part of what makes it so profound is that it's white people fighting white people.
Right.
And I don't think that should be taken lightly as just like a flare up of, confrontation, but something deeper that's happening in the country. And like you were saying, people are in like a wilderness, like there is a spiritual crisis, like basically what we would say is a civilizational crisis of the white world itself. And that's part of the fluid and changing dynamic. And I think that's part of what makes this moment so unstable and uncertain is it's not clear what direction different parts of even white America will go. And I think that part of what I was trying to say earlier is that it's like this moment is forcing the memory and this question of the civil rights movement or of the Third American Revolution onto the consciousness of the nation. You can see it everywhere, basically, in like the New York Times, like all these places, both in a positive and a negative way, where the liberals are trying to basically like kind of redefine or define for themselves what, let's say, Martin Luther King means or what the Black Freedom Movement means, in a way that I actually think it's slightly different from even like the 2020 period, in a way where I actually do think that even white liberals are in a different place than they were in 2020 is part of what I feel. And I guess I bring it up because as we've been talking about, the 250th anniversary of the United States, it's like there are people who will just want to make it about what does 1776 mean, but you can't get to 76 at this point in history without going through the door of the Black freedom movement and Reconstruction. And if you don't get those questions right of what those second and third American revolutions meant, then you can't get the first American Revolution straight. And but I think that this is going to be basically one of the big political and ideological battles that take place among the people in this year.
Can I just say one response? You know, apropos the question of a civil war among white people, and it does look kind of like that. The conflicts are very deep, very angry. But to transform their anger, their rage, and so on into a revolutionary democratic push would be for them to embrace the Black movement, the Black freedom movement. That's ideologically, they can't, I'll put it this way, I think we've said this before, white people do not have enough to stand on to go forward in a revolutionary way. It is only upon the foundation of the Black movement and then, of course, the Baldwin solution. I'm sorry.
No, I think that reflects what I've also been thinking about, where I think over the last few weeks and months, we've talked about a lot of different, I guess, like public intellectuals or thinkers who have been referencing the Civil War. And there was actually like David French this past week basically compared the death of Renee Good and Alex Preddy to like the death of John Brown. Not David French.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so he was more focused on basically how the public reaction creates a greater split within basically white American or the public mainstream, and that basically it furthers like the conditions or the likelihood of an actual like huge conflict breaking out. And yeah, I think that it does mean something. And then there was that other article that we had talked about. Was it like David Brooks or like The Meaning of Home?
Yeah,
and
I
then
know,
kind of, like,
Thomas
so
Friedman.
Thomas Friedman, yeah, like the 3 civil wars.
Yes.
And I think it does, like, to echo what Jeremiah is saying, I think it does mean something that in this 250th year, people want to talk about 1776, but you can't talk about 1776 without also talking about the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the Black freedom movement. And part of it is also like we were talking about how the American Revolution you could talk about as a civil war. The Civil War obviously was a civil war. And you could also cast the Civil Rights Movement or the Black freedom movement in those same terms. And yet I feel like when these writers and public intellectuals are talking about it, the civil rights movement or King and nonviolent resistance is the best case scenario of how to actually engage, I guess, in like democratic struggle. And yeah, and I think some of what is also really clear is the sense of spiritual and moral crisis, where everybody, I think, at this point actually is converging on that theme. Whether it's like Ross Douthat and his like religious Catholic sort of conservative bend, whether it's David Brooks, who's now leaving the New York Times to join the Atlantic. And
he's leaving.
Yeah, he wrote this like essay about why he's leaving, why he has to leave. And the whole essay is basically saying like America is so spiritually lost. And America now is like cynical and pessimistic. And then he's basically saying, but this is not who America is. And he even quotes like Niebuhr. But I think, yeah, Ronald Niebuhr. But I think both like David Brooks and Douthat, like in some ways, the way that they talk about it is almost like searching for a white God or searching for like some God, some center to bind American society back together. And I think it's really clear that even in the difficulty of identifying or defining white identity and the way that Baldwin talks about it, where whiteness was never built on stable ground. It was basically a justification for property. And it's an identity that clearly is like relatively fluid, where you don't have to have white skin or be descended even from Europeans to identify with it. But increasingly, like even the way that, yeah, like Trump like even Trump, like all these white people, he can't trust as being white. And yeah, I think some of it is like the question of what actually can constitute a center for the people, like what actually is the revolutionary heritage.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, like when we're talking about the civil rights movement, we do have to struggle against like this liberal thing of like, oh, like let's just like be nice and like let's reform the liberal state and like this is not who we are. And I think we do have to go to more of this thing of like, I don't know, even when you were talking about like King, the secular and the sacred, or what was like the basis of the movement, the Black freedom movement, and even the struggle against like the ministers in Alabama, and this thing of like renewing Christianity but not in a white way. And so I think in general, like I am really invested in figuring out what like the new relationship between the Black freedom movement of the 60s, how it in some ways is even like an uninterrupted continuous movement from Reconstruction and the defeat of Reconstruction.
Yes.
Because I think part of what also needs to be known or established, I think, is this question of what actually has the Black experience been? What is that body of knowledge? And if whiteness is not stable enough to carry anything through in this world, in this time, then where do we turn to? And what does it actually come from? Because I'm pretty convinced at this point that there is something in the Black freedom tradition, that the Black freedom movement was not just like a blip of the 60s, but that actually it was like decades in the making.
Yes.
And it arises out of like a body of thought, an actual worldview that has been sustained for multiple generations. And that is why, like, it's not just that the civil rights movement was the most recent movement. Like, it is the expression of something that has been basically centuries in the making. That actually goes back even to like 1776 and this whole premise of freedom and like slavery. That was an ideological like part of that revolution.
Can I just say, I'm sorry, very quickly, David Brooks has gone through a previous bout of depression and civilizational pessimism. That's what he's expressing. But I just want to say, the fact that Black folk never accepted the defeat of Reconstruction, they never accepted it. It's an extraordinary politics. And in that sense, they were different than the rest of the nation. They never accepted it. And hence, we talk about these Black gods and so on. And that having set the ideological preconditions for the Black freedom movement, when they, and again I say, who is man and who is God? That might, that doesn't fit into any of the quote radical construals, because isn't that an obscurantist opiate? You want to know what God? Well, you're accepting an idealist opium, but that's not what they were doing, as we all know. But I agree with you, Nuri. The most stable political force for democracy and radical change in this country has been Black folk, and every attempt to find another source of this leads to failure. I have to say, I was a part of trying to find something else. I mean, just if you don't mind me speaking autobiographically, as a young teenage radical, I wanted an alternative to the Black church, but there was no alternative. At another period, I wanted that it can't just be the Black movement. And so, there was always the Black Jewish Alliance, And black people were the first people to accept Jewish people and then have been betrayed in such a ruthless way by them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we got to keep that 100. They're turning on black people, the only group that never judged or evaluated them from an anti-Semitic position, never, and saw us as the same people, as a common people who suffered a common oppression. And really black people, from a theological point of view, trace their connection to Jewish people back to the Old Testament. We really did. And then the Jews, in the name of whiteness and Israel and American imperialism, turned on black people and are still enemies of black people.
Yeah.
But
that's because.
let me just say this, John. That is so interesting. I didn't see that Stephen French article.
David Brooks.
Huh?
David French.
David French. I'm sorry.
Stephen Frost.
But it's such a deep thing that they're all referencing.
Yeah.
It seems like they're reading Du Bois and King because, Becker in his New York Times article talked about the general strike. I mean, there is something ideologically happening at the level of the elite and at the level of the mass. I think this, if you were to kind of do it in an equation, the constant throughout American history, especially since the defeat of Reconstruction, are the black masses. In good times and bad times. The most stable, constant democratic force, never have abandoned the struggle for democracy, and never gave up. It's very interesting. Never gave up on transforming white people. That white people could be transformed. Never gave up on that. Although I can say, even you take Minneapolis, I didn't mention this. You get black people. Hey, John, you probably would agree with me here. Black people say, stay out of that struggle. That ain't our struggle. That, the immigrants, well, hold on, John, let me just say this quickly. They say the immigrants, soon as they get a foothold, they're going to look down on us anyway. And there's some evidence for it. I mean, even among you talk about California and Latino farm workers and stuff. I mean, they carry a lot of anti-black racism, and black people know it. It's not like they rush for unity, Right. So all other social forces in the macro sense tend not to be as stable as black people. No other group have produced either theology, philosophy, or political theory of resistance. There is no equivalent of a James Lawson, who for the last, 60 years of his life, I have to rediscover King. I saw it myself. It was so moving when he was here. It was King. And he was like that with King. And they're literally the same age. He might be older than King. I have to rediscover King in the Black freedom movement. There is no Reinhold Niebuhr, by the way, even a Cornel West, who has so committed himself to the discovery of a philosophy and theory for the 21st century, based upon the Third American Revolution, as I saw with Jim Lawson. Go ahead, Eddie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to bring it back a little bit to our discussion of logics and the revolutionary process of the American people. We've due to Black Reconstruction, thought of the essential categories of three, the capitalist or elite in this sense, the white worker, and the Black worker. And the defining feature in the logic of the American revolutionary process being, unfortunately, that the white worker has ultimately sided with the capitalist or the elite and have not had a very strong relationship with the black worker. Even though the black worker has always been open to being with white people in a like principled human way. And what's like interesting, at least, is that that connection that the white worker has with the capitalist or elite is weakening. Not all of them, a certain segment of that. And in this logic, I would even say that immigrants of anywhere in the world, really, including in particular right now, Hispanic or Latino immigrants, often do have a stronger relationship with the capitalist or elite than they do with the black worker, even though they might, protest and whatnot for, we should have papers, we should have jobs and all that. We shouldn't be treated like this. Like ultimately, I'm from a family of Mexican immigrants. Ultimately, the way that at least I was raised was do good, move up within society, and then you can help us out, either through legal means or slide me a few bills like that. Nothing like what I'm seeing with these white people in Minneapolis who say I cannot stand or I cannot accept this face of whiteness that has this brutality and violence. And that's a really interesting thing. I don't have a strong sense of how strong there even is a relationship between, let's say, that segment of white people and Hispanic Latinos. I was looking at Wikipedia, at least the demographics of Minneapolis. It's only about like 10% Hispanic Latino. I think there might be like 20-30% black. It's much more black people in Minneapolis than there is Hispanic Latinos.
But see, then you got a huge Somali East African population, which is not African American,
Right.
except that
But they count them the same, right?
Yeah, I know they count them.
They
Yeah,
count them the same.
but black people don't count them in with us.
No.
And but I hate to wash dirty linen in public. But no.
Nah, I understand. But what is interesting is that the relationship even amongst the white workers, which is like the immigrants, that I have not seen this strength of response of the immigrants who feel this I would say unacceptance of whiteness as it has been presented. And I'll say that, for example, my dad's, I guess now ex-girlfriend, she was working at a factory, right? They were hiring a bunch of Venezuelans. She didn't like them coming in. She's like, man, they like coming in here. They have preferential hiring treatment to the established people. They pay them less, and that's not good for me. Which is the way that immigrants are used for cheaper labor. And yet, I have not heard, I guess, of that principled unacceptance of the way society is right now and wanting to change it the way that this segment of white people who, in their own way, are trying to. And I guess the question is how can this segment of the white population identify and have a new principled relationship with black people?
Yeah. Go, Eddie. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you.
No, go ahead.
See, here we get, this is why the question, class and civilization.
Yeah.
How far, and we've never explored this, I know I never have, all my years, communism and this, that, and the other. What are the limits of class consciousness? Can it, as we say, fulfill the unfulfilled aspirations of democracy? You can construe it in a certain way that it will free humanity. But in an empirical sense, I think, apropos what you're saying, it has profound limitations. So therefore, we need another framing. And this is what I think is the civilizational. And that's what I see in the Battle of Minneapolis. That it had to, and that's you know, see, you could even, there was a leftist critique of Martin Luther King, which was pretty much a Trotskyist. I mean, they were very openly critical of Martin Luther King back in the day. And they went so far as to align with Malcolm X. And they accepted the standard bourgeois portrayal of Martin Luther King as a mere liberal kind of thing. And then there was that, well, and I would even say this had some resonance in the Communist Party, and there was a battle, which was along the color line in some ways, over the assessment of Martin Luther King. That he, at best, and I thought this was very patronizing, at best, could be a progressive or left liberal. You see what I'm saying? And we await a Walter Reuther type UAW figure emerging to advance class consciousness.
Yeah.
I mean, now we look back, it was mistaken in so many ways. Now, we as Black folk, let's say in the Communist Party, felt a certain of being offended by this, you know? But the thing I want to raise is the limitations of class consciousness in a society configured as we are. And hence the question of a trialectic. Now, this is all over PSL, by the way. It is. Constant democratic mass, which has developed over historical time, then you are literally becoming a narrow sectarian. What do we mean by, yeah, you might have people Martin Luther King and their movement, which is a great movement and yada, yada, yada. Black workers are not enjoying you. Just because you say we're the vanguard of the working class, that don't mean shit. That's just rhetoric for Black people. Yeah. And they look at it with a certain cynicism, a certain, oh, please. Like they look at it, when you come around Black people talking like that, they look at you as, well, you just got out of college and you're talking shit. You want to talk shit. They're not going to respond to it.
I just want
to. Wait, John, let that Emily come in.
I just feel like the trialectic and the logic is so key here. Because,
speak up a little bit, Emily.
The trialectic and the logic stuff is so key here because, I feel like, in the context of the US, I feel like the question is, what is the opposite of liberal? What is the opposite of liberal? Is it socialist? Is it socialism?
This is a very interesting question.
Or is it white supremacy, right? Because I feel like
Go
that's
ahead.
such a key question.
This
And
is
why
a
the
very
American,
important political question.
why the American Revolution is so important,
Mhm,
because
mhm,
that's what consolidated what
mhm.
liberal meant in the US.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody want to, but this is a very important, see,
Yeah.
this is a question of political identities and the character of political mobilizations.
Mhm.
For example, I can take Philadelphia as an example, as an instance. We have, with the quote threat of ICE coming here, you have certain mobilizations. I don't know whether you guys have seen any of them. You have Power,
Yeah.
which is, I don't know, I'm talking, is really a Zionist-funded, Zionist-controlled organization, which fronts as a Black preacher, Black religious thing, which, in other words, tries to look like the civil rights movement. You know what I'm saying? That's one. You get another coalition, which has nonprofits and some labor staffers and so on in it, which seems to present itself as the more activist, militant, yada, 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 yada. But each side wants to elect Democrats. The dream of this last group I'm talking about is a Philadelphia Mamdani,
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, the problem is that that a Mamdani is not going to mobilize the Black masses. Let me tell you why. There is a fatal flaw in it, because the idea of Mamdani, now we've had 3 or 4 Black mayors. Black folk politically coming out of the 70s transformed the politics of the city of Philadelphia. How far it has gone, well, not that far. But it is not the city when a white Democratic political machine controlled everything. And liberals, let us say from the University of Pennsylvania, and then kind of traditional liberals in the Democratic Party, ultimately had to concede to this Black movement because the numbers change. But then Black folk are disenchanted with Black politicians and the liberal control of them, which many Black people associate with Zionist control of Black politics. You know what I'm saying? So to come down the center, let us say, with a Mamdani type, a social democratic type, there's going to be at least deep skepticism, if not, cynicism about it. Well, how you coming now? Where were you? That type of thing. So if you were to ask me, Black folk are not going to be moved by movements that are led by white liberals or white social democrats. They see them as opportunist attempts to use Black people as a cannon fodder, a mass vanguard, and then when you get what you want, kick them to the curb. There is no, and by the way, they have experience. The labor movement did it. The CIO, when it sold out to the AFL, that's what that was about, the race question in labor. And so, apropos your question, Emily, I think we have to see this constant force for democracy and radical, and for peace. It's subjectively that it has been that for decades, over several generations. You know what I'm saying?
I just want to
hold it, John. One more point I want to make. And thus, to come and say, like, let's say the DSA, well, Black people are going to go with us because we have the best slogans. No, they're not. No, they're not. They will wait. There's something about Black people, if I might they will wait it out. They will wait you out. and look at you and you know, talk about you behind your back in their own circles. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way they do in their churches. They'll talk about you like you see that white person, fuck it, you know, and such. So I think what I would say, it is neither liberal or MAGA. It is a genuine movement for democracy, which Black folk as a whole still identify with the Black freedom movement and Martin Luther King. But let her come in, John. I'm sorry, man. I don't mean to keep cutting you off.
Yeah, well, actually, because I was listening to John, what you said intently. The thing that I thought was compelling about what you said, actually, and I don't know if, I don't know if this is what you meant, but when you were talking about the Latinos in Texas, for example, or Hispanics, what's interesting is actually, you made me think that part of the concentration, or at least what seems to be a concentration on closing down on immigration, especially around Latinos in particular, is I think because at this time there's such a deep civilizational crisis that I think you mentioned the word unpredictable, is that I actually think some of it is because so-called Latinos represent no longer, maybe Mary was trying to say this, they no longer represent a controllable or predictable political force. Like you're talking about their votes and stuff.
Yeah, but because if you notice what's happening at the same time, they're trying to gerrymander Texas districts and districts in California because they're looking at the demographic data. They're saying this population is 40% of the state's population. They're 40% in California. If they get into a collective mindset and decide they want a certain candidate, they can decide a whole election.
Exactly.
But the whole thing is this: in terms of, if you want to understand it in terms of a trialectic or a logical framework, I think you have to study what other people have said or understand in terms of what whiteness means. Because a criminal court judge in Tennessee made this statement about McVeigh when McVeigh bombed the federal building in Oklahoma. He was an Army veteran, and he was also a member of the KKK secretly. But the reason why he bombed the federal building is because when he saw what happened to the Branch Davidians, they wanted to exercise their First Amendment rights to keep guns, and the government went in and took their guns away, and he felt it was an infringement on white men's rights. And what this criminal court judge says is that a lot of what the government tries to do is appease the white male, because if they don't, if the white male feels like he can't get into the economy, if he feels like his rights are being infringed upon, he believes he's the sole main person that's making this country run. If he feels violated, he will act out in domestic terrorism. So a lot of it is the government is trying to appease the white male in terms of the labor movement, to keep him appeased, to keep him employed, to make sure he has all his rights. Then now when it comes to liberal, socialist, and so forth, these are labels based upon what the government will allow you to do. If you say you want to be liberal, you want the taxation dollars to help you to live your life and so forth. With a fiscal conservative, they're saying, I don't want to pay more taxes to help these other people over here. But if society gets into a point where you get large segments of the population that are unemployable because of technology, then you may have a situation in which you have a semi-socialist state where certain people have to be given a benefit because they cannot get full employment because of the way the technology is taking over a lot of the economy. So I'm saying, like, these are like fluid terms that are moving back and forth. But the main thing I would, like, if I was a person today, I would study the economists like Claude Anderson and this other guy named Diallo, Diallo, because they're talking about the ways the economy is changing because of technology and what the monetary order is breaking down. And this is what is not being told to the everyday citizen that's out here working, paying taxes and so forth. They're not being told what's happening, why this inflation is happening.
Well, because the thing that I wanted to build on what you were saying is that you said the alpha white male, that is the thorn in, I guess, the non-existent rose of Trump, where they've put their lot with the wrong people in some ways. Well, because the thing I thought was most important about what you laid out in the beginning, Doc, was actually one thing you have to give Trump is that he's going to just say it. He's going to say what he means out in the open. And what you said about his Davos speech, where he said, to save the economic system, you have to save white civilization.
Yes.
But in some ways connected to that is to save white civilization, we will have to go to war. Like we will have to assert something that he promised that he would remove this country from. And actually, to me, it was really clarifying when you brought up the development, in some ways, the tragic or farcical development of MAGA that put Trump into, that really represented at one point like a movement of people who were developing a certain framework, where you said that what held them together was not, there were a lot of white supremacists, what held together that what consolidated that force that allowed them to be a force that actually put Trump into office is the fact that they were anti-war, that they wanted to remove this involvement in war. But the problem is that even people with Marjorie Taylor Greene, you can kind of hear it in Trump in his own way now in Marjorie Taylor Greene. The problem is that there is no white way out of war. And I think that's what we're trying to say. I think people recognize the existential threat of the question of war and peace, which is, I think, what, John, you were also referencing about the spiritual crisis. That has to be seen as an existential manifestation of war and peace. But there is no white way out of war. There has to be a civilizational way out of war. And I think that is the reason why MAGA is falling apart so much, is that they don't have a civilizational proposal of how to transform even the human relations that make that the human relations of the people in the country, to make war humanly impossible. And instead, and that's also why King becomes so important, because his Beyond Vietnam speeches, he's basically saying the question of how to make war, these existential, very material, concrete questions of war and peace, or even how to eliminate poverty, or even how to eliminate white supremacy, how to make all these injustices impossible, like humanly, predictably impossible in the future, is that it comes to a fundamental human question of good and evil. It's not as simple as just an economic change, or it's not as simple as we just need to, like John is saying, get rid of the immigrants or a policy change, but it's a fundamental civilizational question. The reason why I also found that clarifying is, the other thing I found clarifying is that you have to see everything, including Minneapolis, as a civilizational crisis, like white on white civilizational clash. It's honestly astounding to me. Watching Minneapolis is astounding because it all started with immigration, right? It was supposed to have ICE was in Minneapolis, apparently for immigration, but everything you're watching, you don't really see any immigrants in the mix. You're just seeing white on white. And it's almost like it's a contestation of two sides fighting each other on the question of, are white people just meant to be evil? Are white people just meant to kill? Is that who we are? What does whiteness really mean? What is this society? I mean, because even my coworkers, they're very emotional. These are rank and file white coworkers of mine who became union staffers. But they have really sad stories basically about how they live with their sons. These are white women who live with sons who they feel like they don't know anymore. They gave birth to this son, and their son is collecting weapons, and their son wants to join ICE. It's like a civilizational crisis where blood doesn't even matter anymore. It's a civilizational, personal crisis. And the thing that was really deep in what you said, Doc, was how you were after the civil rights movement, after the 60s in particular, which then we in Free School call it the period of counter-revolution, not just in the US, but even in the world. It affects the whole world. the Cold War is continuing, like the battle of like basically the battle of white civilization versus alternatives to whiteness, including the Soviet Union. Like the Soviet Union should be seen as an alternative to a white supremacist way of orienting society. How do you center the human being? How, and even in terms of like your economy, art, culture, is there a way to do it that is not defined just by white supremacy? But it was interesting that you raised your like, in America, when all the deindustrialization happened, decade after decade, why is it that the people who should know that they were going to eventually be affected, although they were not first, which is the white workers, why is it that they and their labor unions did not seem to put up a fight, but instead made a bargain with the state? They said, okay, as long as we still can get cheap goods, as long as we can keep our standard of living, you guys can go out and do whatever you want in terms of neo-colonial policy. Like, why is it that that bargain happened? That is cannot be explained by class. It has to be explained by consciousness. And what defines consciousness? Class, or does civilization play a role? And is that what we're seeing now? Like that rooster coming home, the chicken coming home to roost. And I do think the other thing that comes into play is when you clarified, even on the world stage, why is it that all these communist parties in the European countries were satisfied with themselves getting affordable healthcare because the US said we will create a certain economic agreement, but really it's also behind a certain civilizational agreement where these European countries are put in a pretty good space, even though they should have been destroyed after World War II. Why is it that they're put in a certain place where their people are even getting affordable healthcare while the American working class is being punished? Like we don't have affordable healthcare, like at all. It's the opposite. We have an extremely privatized healthcare system, which many of us are like our work is involved in. But why is it that those communist parties, despite all their Marx, all their Lenin, all the intellectual theory, radical theory that they have, was not enough to show them that there's something problematic, in this agreement?
This is huge. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to raise that again because that was what I was really thinking about.
And Emily, the only reason I raise it, as you know, I'm trying to always tell stories about things that I saw, and you could not have seen this, because the world communist movement had collapsed for the most part when you guys were born. But can you imagine? Let's just take Italy and France. Huge communist parties that won local elections, mayoral elections, and led the major trade unions. But yet, they made no efforts to take power through peaceful means or whatever means. Didn't attempt it. Even in Portugal, whose communist party was underground but very militant, highly organized, when the fascist regime collapsed as a result of the colonial wars in Africa, when the regime collapsed, the communists didn't seek to take power, they gave it to the Socialist Party. And so when I think about it these days, why? Why did you not seek power? When you had, it seemed, all of the mechanisms to do so. But here in the United States, because we didn't have a big communist party, people said, well, there's no revolutionary struggle. But there was. And I would say this, by the way, there were the most foresighted communists in the Communist Party, understood that a revolutionary process, democratic process, would and might occur without a big communist party. In fact, I would say most of us accepted that as a conditionality, that we would have a small party, that the party would operate, with a sophisticated tactics of unity, of coalition with other groups. But, and this is Winston and Patterson and them, ultimately, when they saw Martin Luther King, they saw the future. And that's why Winston writes this, very famous article from the anti-slavery to the anti-monopoly, by which he meant also the anti-imperialist struggle, from Frederick Douglass to Martin Luther King. And that was But Europe never produced that. Western Europe never produces it with huge communist parties.
Yeah, well,
I'll add briefly that I think that was the part that I really appreciated about your opening remarks, how you connected like Minneapolis and Davos to this question of empire and war. It's something about like what you were saying in terms of actually making sense of this would also require like this examination of like whiteness, and it just reminded me of even how like there's the precedence to what we were talking about in terms of the way in which like Europe has this like supposedly long history of like radical communist parties, and yet none of them mount that kind of like resistance and break with whiteness that you would think that all these theories or all these philosophers like Marx and Lenin should have taught them to do.
Can I just say one thing? In spite of the fact that they were all a part of the anti-fascist struggle in Europe during the 30s and the 40s, all were part of that. But yet were constrained when it came to seizing power. And we're not talking, they could seize it on the grounds of democracy, anti-war, anti-NATO. Never did. I'm sorry.
And the only thing I was going to add is that reminded me of Du Bois's The World in Africa, which he writes right after World War II.
Yes.
But he like pulls the timeline all the way back to even the transatlantic slave trade and then the rise of even European colonies in Africa and Asia, where the bargain, even in like the 19th or the 18th and 19th centuries, was that here we can develop the most prosperous cities, the capitalist civilization that like Sam Becker talks about, and yet all of that luxury and beauty is going to be built on the back of so many lies. Like going back to this idea of fiction that I think really got brought out, when we were talking about the Mark Carney speech, but really like the idea that, even the pacification of white workers in Europe kind of even began long before even the 20th century, even as early as like the 16th, 17th, and 19th centuries. And to me, like it is just important for me when I want to go back to that, because Du Bois is writing this at that turning point of like, so look at where all of that supposedly got you Europe. It got you to your collapse. It got you to this moment where you cannot, all that you proclaim to be, progress or development, and but like it became like this history of like this really bloody free for all in Europe, but also, that engulfed the whole world. In some ways, like that also has to be understood in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of like whiteness being so unstable, or like whiteness being such a yeah, I was gonna say more, but I just have been really I've been, not to jump so much because I don't even know if I fully like expounded this, because it reminds me so much of our current moment, but I think the reason why we've also been so interested in making sense of deindustrialization was partially because we didn't just see it like for the past year or so. Free School has been undertaking a sociological study of deindustrialization rooted here in Philadelphia, actually in a city in which like industry once actually was a place in which like ordinary, like not just working people, but Black folk organized themselves, but also created an alternate social system. But that was viciously attacked and, exported as part of almost this way in which empire tries to export its contradictions elsewhere, so that one does not have to face them at home. And yet this moment really brings to light this thing that deindustrialization is not just an economic policy that would have been explained by self-interest, actual profit, or saving, or maximizing the wealth of Americans. You just see it so clearly that it's just the social contract never was actually set in a way that rested on an actual principle of
of truth. Instead, like you can really see that even white people feel that like like it's not just basically I see this as like not just an economic this is not just an economic policy, but it's clearly a social policy. It's also clearly a social strategy in terms of punishing like Black workers, but it's also in other ways, also, you know, like pulling the rug out also from white workers. In some ways, this is the moment in which it's really clear that like all these questions of what it means to of being so dissatisfied with whiteness or this lack of a social contract, the overwhelming reliance on these fictions of whiteness, like really are back on the table. And I feel like the question that you asked, and I don't know how well I'm like connecting all these things, like going back to the question you asked about how many white people, like what percentage of them are ready to like put all this aside and to like worship something new, ready for like a new civilization, ready for a new kind of social contract. All those things are starting to come up, and ready to basically accept like King or the Black freedom movement as their moral center. Like that is like something that's coming more and more to the forefront for me, because like even this thing of like white, like trying to find a white God to hold it all together. When you use the word incarnate today, I like finally Googled what that meant, because I think like last night we were having this conversation about like actually what does the Bible say, like what is an anointing one, because you were using that word the other day. But what does incarnate mean? Incarnate means when God is embodied in flesh, like, and that is what you were describing Trump as, in terms, or at least seeking to try to like believe himself to be at the center of all this delusion, to believe that like he is God that has come to earth. And in some ways, like that also shows like, if this is what you believe God is, so many white people are looking at this and saying, I don't want that. Like, this is not what I want to be. And this visceral reaction of like, if this is what like whiteness and like white, you know, civilization has, you know, produced, then this is not it. And so this is the question I think that the other sociological study the Free School has been undertaking, is the study of Black gods, like the study of all these organizations and movements and religious like movements among Black folk in the wake of the betrayal of Reconstruction, to begin understanding why so many of them believe that God came to them, or they were these Black men were the embodiment of God in a time when segregation was still legal, lynching was still so widespread, that Black folk who were leaving the South in the wake of Jim Crow, like finding themselves in the urban North, still not yet achieving that kind of, not yet coming to a land of freedom, and then creating all these institutions. In some ways, this is why we do see like the alternate civilization, the alternative to whiteness, having some kind of way in which it can be, like offered to the American people in this kind of time. Yeah.
Well, can I just ask a question?
I jumped a lot there,
I need to clarify. I know the word incarnate and anointed.
Yes.
These concepts resonate with you in a certain way, if you don't mind me. Is that true?
It's because I was so curious about religion. I didn't grow up necessarily in the Christian church, but I actually feel that they're used so much in the, like, not just English language, but also actually in, like, as actually, John, when you're talking about the blurring of like church and state, especially in this time, I was also thinking that like, these are words that I think in like even American English, you still hear a lot. And I've always wanted to know what they meant, and actually looked up anointed the other day. And I feel like the way we're starting to use it feels a little different than the traditional definition, that like anointed means like God has appointed you to be a successor. But of late, since we've been saying that king can be looked at as a person who's also been anointed by history, anointed by the people.
Can I tell you, if I could just say, because I've been thinking about, you know, when we were at Kennett Square and you asked that question, you know, because in our reading of Taylor Branch, we had talked about a king's battle with the sacred secular dialectic. Because, you know, most academic theologians like the Reinhold Niebers and so on, and even the Cornel West, have abandoned the sacred for the secular. And that's one of the conclusions they drew from the anti-fascist struggle, that the church failed and that the only morality that makes sense is a secular morality. And, you know, King had to navigate that. And I'm not quite altogether clear on his resolution of it. Now, you know, you get Baldwin, who acknowledges the sacred more in poetics and discourse, but he is completely secular. King is not completely secular because, you know, his concept of a cosmic partnership, something way beyond, you know, this world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in each instance, you know, like if you say that King is anointed by history and humanity, you don't necessarily make the sacred or religious argument. You say he is anointed by his, now, whether he would accept that, I don't know. Whether Lawson would accept that formulation, because it's not in the sacred.
But that's
Okay, I'm
what's
sorry.
interesting is that Lawson, in one of those speeches that we looked at, he said King was like the second or third coming of Christ, or maybe the 100th coming of Christ. And he says anointed by God, but then says more importantly, anointed by the people.
Oh,
and he says the people anointing King is actually maybe more important than King being anointed by God. And in a way, you could even look at that as part of a larger framework that was maybe developed by people like Howard Thurman, where Thurman evaluates Christ not on the basis of was Christ like literally God incarnate, but on the basis of what did Christ mean for the oppressed of that time and for the oppressed of this time. And I just wanted to add that, like, on this whole conversation, a few things, which is one of which is that, like Kathy said, how do you explain, like, and as other people have said, how do you explain Trump's, like, not just like the chaotic actions, but it's like the kind of nihilistic way that he operates. And I do think that part of it is this whole thing of he's seeing himself as God or godlike, but it's also that the whole premise of MAGA is like make America great again. But it's like the obvious things they're trying to resurrect in America that never really existed, like a fake America that basically is for white people. And it's like because Trump has been so invested in that idea, it's like it's unmoored him from reality, I think. And actually, I'm sorry to bring up the Adam Tooze thing again, but Tooze has this interesting piece in the interview with Ezra Klein where he says, part of what brings together Russia and China is their diagnosis of 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union.
That was very interesting.
And Tooze says that the Chinese Communist Party, that they diagnose part of the failure of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union as what the Chinese call historical nihilism, which is rejecting your own history, basically, which is that, you know, when Khrushchev made his secret speech against Stalin, that is what the Chinese understand as rejecting their own history. And in many ways, you could see that phenomenon everywhere, not just in the MAGA movement, but also among basically the entire left of like, the movement that you're imagining for this century basically acts as if the past 150 years of American history have not happened. It's like you're trying to do politics in a country in which, like, not just the kind of larger stuff of like the trilectic that we talk about, but even the way that people do politics in America has been changed by Black people. And you're trying to invent basically a fiction of political movement or radical movement in this time, which is like essentially projecting the actual history that you come out of. And I just wanted to also bring it back, like, to
the history that makes you possible.
The history that makes you possible. And the last thing is on this question of civilization. I think we'd said it before, but part of what we're trying to work out in these, I think, many open questions about what does civilization mean for this time, Is it a revolutionary concept, a revolutionary category? I think I said this before, but that from the very beginning, when Marx and Engels were identifying this category of the proletariat, it was not just a descriptive category. It was a category of consciousness.
Mhm.
It was basically, we're trying to identify who is the revolutionary agent in society, and can that revolutionary agent become conscious of itself? Like that is the whole point of class consciousness, and the term the proletariat, even more so than the working class. Like there's a reason why you distinguish between those, and why we say the black proletariat and not the white proletariat. And I think that part of what we're trying to work out and propose for this time is that in many ways, because of the Black freedom movement, it's possible to see civilization as the kind of category which is not descriptive, but is self-actualizing, which is a category of consciousness that the people themselves identify with. Which is why when, for instance, when Martin Luther King gave his speech at Holt Street Baptist Church in December 1955, when the Montgomery bus boycott is just about to kick off after the arrest of Rosa Parks, King ends that speech by basically making a call to civilization. He ends that 1955, like his first real speech as a leader of the movement, by saying, one day that people will talk about a race of people, a black race of people who inject a new meaning into the veins of civilization. And like, I think it's really important to see that what comes out, what emanates from this third American Revolution, the possibility for basically a new category of the people themselves recognizing themselves as agents of revolutionary change. Okay.
Wait, because this is like related to Becker, and I hope we can talk more about Becker going forward, because I think it is actually really worthwhile zooming out and trying to take a large view of history. And this thing of the establishment of capitalist civilization, like I also think we should debate and like talk about, like, is it a single capitalist civilization? What are the implications of that? But part of what is really illuminating is that through the actions of these capitalists or these merchants, something is set into motion and it unleashes a whole lot more. Like they don't know necessarily what it is, the whole extent of the structure that they're basically starting to build. And yet the merchants, the islands, whatever, they become archipelagos, and then they remake the whole world. And then they create, like, there's a new class, the bourgeois class, the bourgeoisie. And I think it's actually very meaningful that the bourgeoisie is a class that is basically like interested in ideas, that they create a new culture. And the bourgeoisie like is interested in ideas because they need ideas to basically give them like a sense of legitimacy and to actually be able to rule. And it's interesting seeing basically this movement through the centuries of an increasing interest in ideas, a recognition of their importance in constituting a people, in governing society. And then when like the working class also is gaining consciousness of themselves and are also interested in ideas. And I just think that this move of history of becoming like increasingly invested in ideas and actually needing ideas in order to like find the people, to govern the people, to have a sense of the future is an important part of even like the secular religious thing, because I feel like pre-capitalist civilization, the ideas that would anchor like a civilization or a kingdom or feudal rule would basically be like some sense of religion. And so what is the appropriate role of religion or ideas guiding ideals in a modern era? And when earlier in the conversation, we were sort of exploring like, why are even the ruling elite or the so-called public intellectuals who maybe serve like a different class, why are they even finding it necessary to be receptive to or interested in these ideas of the Civil War, of the Civil Rights Movement, of the Black Freedom Movement, even Du Bois and the General Strike? And I think I'm just saying this to say that I really think civilization is in some ways like, and it's not even just about like American civilization. Like politically, I think for us, it is about civilization in America. But I think there's also this greater like universal human question of like all these centuries where we have gained like forces of production, we've gained technology, like child mortality is lower than it's ever been, and people have jobs, we have cars. But still, like there are these human questions of like poverty, war, discrimination and racism that haunt us still, and what is actually going to be the way out of that. And I think it's worthwhile asking, like, yeah, is it going to be a proletariat? Is it going to be a class struggle? What is the form that consciousness is actually going to take? And fundamentally, like, how has consciousness changed over the last 5 years, 10 years, 50 years of the American people? Because I feel like what we have done in free school is actually examine that consciousness literally week by week. And whether it's the encampments, whether it's George Floyd, whether it's the first election of Trump, the second election of Trump, I feel like the American people are changing. And I feel like our task is to actually understand the progressive edge of that consciousness, the contradictions that the people actually face and have to figure out. And genuinely, like, does a framework of class struggle explain it? Or what will explain it? And I feel like civilization, it's not like we have a dogmatic understanding of what we mean by that in its totality. But I think basically the terms and the stakes of this are something, I think, new. And I feel like for me, like, reading Becker and sort of thinking about like what actually has been our like human journey through like even these centuries, and where are we now in history, and what ideas will actually like do justice to that is important to basically like our task.
I had going off of incarnation, and I'm sorry, there's a couple of things that like throughout this entire, like between the three of you, that they're like really solidly married to the German ideology, which was done by Marx, right? So from just a historical perspective, like you said, going way back, you know, like the bourgeoisie started coming up with these ideas for themselves and everything, but that was downstream of them actually establishing a material relationship to the world where their productive forces actually started propelling things forward. So going back to the incarnation part, God did a lot of stuff through the Israelites. He did a lot of stuff through, you know, the Jewish people and everything, you know, and all of that stuff was great. But until he incarnated, there wasn't a material presence of God in the world specifically. And when he did, what he left behind was a trained Acts church. And that Acts church actually created material differences that displaced the priest caste of the old world, that went out and actually supplanted the economy through just simply growing. People wanted this type, not that type, because this type provided equality amongst each other. This type provided unity amongst each other. It didn't matter your race, didn't matter your color. And by the way, this is a religion that spread through the Silk Road. So, I mean, the matter of diversity was very clear and obvious. Corinth, Ephesus, you know, all these places were extremely diverse populations, and yet they were displaced by Christianity, specifically the Acts Church Christianity. It wasn't until Christianity was imperialized that it ceased to function this way. But the idea is they changed the material relationship, which in turn changed the civilizational direction. So going back to the bourgeoisie, they did the same thing. Their material direction started influencing everything. It started driving the economy, and as it did, their ideas supplanted everyone else's. This is the German ideology. The material precedes the actual idea, right? So if we were to apply this to the current state, what we have to start thinking about is how do we form structures that actually displace the current mode of production? Now, we've got, we can look back to the industrial, 20th century. The industrial 20th century was white people. The white culture is actually defined by that because it was exclusive to them. If you were white, your whiteness was based on that material connection to the industrial, production of the country, and therefore, and because it was gatekept, because it was literally sequestered, so that the only good jobs that could be had were, through these, we'll call it the labor aristocracy. Even Lenin calls it the labor aristocracy. The labor aristocracy existed as these unions that cut absolutely everybody else out to include the black proletariat, and then you had the AFL supplanting the CIO, and then you had this entire hierarchy or tiered structure which was captured. But we are now deindustrialized. And there is real opportunity to start reindustrializing ourselves. We're gonna have to do it ourselves. It's not gonna be something that, can be done. We're not gonna accept anybody's help or we're gonna have to bootstrap. But if we have a plan to reindustrialize ourselves and spread our civilization the way the axe troops did, we could definitely do that. And I think if we want to define our civilizational, project, we have to do it with the material means first, because that's how these things grow.
I have two questions. Sorry. This is easy, quick stuff. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Tony.
Tony, thank you. You mentioned earlier a Zionist-led organization that proposes Black revolutionaries. You said they were called Powell?
Mm-hmm.
Power.
Power.
Oh, Power. Okay. I'm like, Powell. I'm just taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then my other question is, in your opening statements, you said that, you mentioned that this stuff going on in Minneapolis is like they're calling it a civil rights movement. And if I understood, you were saying how the original civil rights movement, basically you're saying it's a civil rights movement, no Black people. And then you mentioned the original civil rights movement. You said, well, I mean, let's be real, it's the Black freedom movement. Were you saying that the struggles of the 50s, 60s, and 70s should never have been called the civil rights movement? It should have just been called the Black freedom movement? Or are you saying that any civil rights movement moving forward has to include Black people, Black interests, or something else?
Yeah, it's just, the participants, for the most part, except I guess when they were talking to the press or public, certain white publics would call it the civil rights movement. They more than not called it the Black freedom movement. And even Lawson, when he was here, he insisted that it be called that. And I think in calling it a civil rights movement, it appropriates it to the liberal narrative about civil rights, and thus diminishes the centrality of the Black struggle, the foundation upon which all other, I put this, civil rights movements, the Black freedom movement is the foundation upon which other civil rights movements then evolve. See, I think you're back to Jeremiah's point of what category of human organization best defines the moment we're in and the struggle that must be waged. You know what I'm saying? I mean, perhaps in the 19th century with Marx and Engels and writing as they did, and of course, even Das Kapital, where they established the foundations of the class struggle. You know what I'm saying? But then much has transpired since then. And I think that's why, you talk about the Battle of Minneapolis. And I think it could be a very central and transformative moment. We just don't know yet. There's some, forgive me, some leftists who want to always define everything in these broad terms in their own revolutionary ways. But if it is anything, it is a successor of the Black freedom movement. I guess, and so then we're back to the Black freedom movement. You understand? Which, how to explain it? And that's, I was talking about the struggles in the left, even in the Communist Party, but definitely Trotskyists and Maoists. I often think of Norman Finkelstein, who has a lot to say about the Gaza situation. But back in the time of the Black freedom movement, he was a cold-blooded gang of 4 people. He wasn't even in no shit. That was all. Or his mentor, his idol, Noam Chomsky, who said he could not stand to listen to Martin Luther King. And there were many leftists and liberals like that, you know? But I think that, see, what do you do with something that Marx and Engels and Mao or anyone else, Lenin, could not imagine or perceive? What does it mean when you have a population whose identity is not just the color of their skin, but their resistance? I mean, I don't think I would be exaggerating at all to say that what unites Black people is the sense, which is a sense of pride also, of this great struggle. Now, what do you do with that? This constant, over, let us say, 150 years since the defeat of Riga, how do you deal with that? Is this a class movement? Well, maybe you could say that if you want to broaden the definition of class. But is it something even more transformative of a civilization? Is it that mirror for white folk to say there is an alternative to whiteness, and thus raising the ideological struggle to levels that go beyond the German ideology? And I'm not saying that I'm right, but I'm saying we have to take in the particularities and uniqueness of this country and this struggle. And what is profound, the qualitative difference, is the existence of this mass of Black people. Let me just say one small other thing, and that's Jerry's point. We had been talking about this going back about 3 years. Marx and Du Bois. And one of the things that we were trying, I had made the statement that Marx is a general theory of social development, and Du Bois is a particular theory. And Jerry, and we haven't resolved it, we haven't been back to it, but Jeremiah said, well, suppose Du Bois is the general theory and Marx is a particular theory particular to a particular time and space. And suppose that Du Bois, looking at the broad sweep of history, including the darker races and the anti-colonial struggle, is a general theory of the movement of history. And hence, is the movement of history defined by the class struggle, or was that specific to a particular time? You said,
Well,
go.
So what I would say is, historically speaking, in America, the only peoples in America who have consistently embodied being the proletariat, period, are Black people.
No, it is. Yes.
I actually think that it's neither one's particular or one's universal. I think they're both universal, and I think there's an inclusiveness to this. The idea that we would consider the idea that when we say Black proletariat, we're saying something other than the proletariat is a misnomer. It has to be defined as that in America because that's the particular American experience, right? Historical materialism shows us that the Black proletariat has been the proletariat consistently all the way through. The white proletariat has come up in existence a little bit here and there, but then every single time that they get the opportunity to do something with that, be actual revolution or something like Bacon's Rebellion happens, and they freaking throw it all away. And then, of course, they end up siding with the aristocracy because there's, a lot of European, still even to this day when I hate it, but there's a lot of European connection to this idea of aristocracy. It's an absolute, class betrayal. But who is the proletariat in America is the Black proletariat.
Yeah.
So this is the idea that the white proletariat could become the black proletariat is literally how American whites have to start looking at becoming proletariat.
And that process would fall within the bounds of a change of civilization, the way we're defining it. So I think, yeah.
But then wouldn't the ultimate proletariat struggle be the Memphis sanitation workers strike when they had signs saying, "I am a man," meaning that what it means is that you have a scientific elite inside the white community that always views the Negro African as being a primordial person. That this is the reason why there were laws against any type of interracial marriage, because it was believed that the offspring, the mulatto, was someone that was lesser than what the white person was. So therefore, it's not only the fact that blacks have been the proletariat, the working class, the whites have been the working class as well. And usually when they got into the working class, they got access to unions, jobs which paid a better wage. A lot of blacks could not get in unions.
But that's by
so also, but it was the scientific white elite that is more agnostic in their viewpoint that the black African or the Negro African is a primordial person. We cannot give him full rights. We cannot see him as a full man because he is not. And they have this evolutionary view of who black people are. And this is in the public policy, even though they don't say it, it's something that's in public policy and it's in the way they operate in terms of when they deal with the black American people in this country. They don't see them as being full human beings, you know?
Yeah. Right, but that's what happens when you let the bourgeoisie define proletariat politics. I mean, we basically, one of the biggest issues that I would say, because, you know, I grew up in, you know, middle class white America, the lower rung, but I did, and I was indoctrinated and all that. I ended up becoming a soldier because of it, and I ended up, you know, going off to fight and honestly waste the effort that I thought I was, you know, putting in on something absolutely horrible. I thought I stand against it. I hate it. I speak out against it. But the thing is, we are taught that the higher ideals or the liberal ideals are somehow compatible with the proletariat ideals, and this is part of the white experience in America. The white American is constantly being told that the meritocracy is that of the aristocracy. So if we achieve something and they impose their ideas upon it, we accept those ideas as if they're part of the proletariat movement, which is why we continuously struggle to abandon whiteness in its entirety. But this is the thing that's actually starting to disintegrate. I mean, especially as of yesterday, when we found out that the entire meritocracy is part of this Epstein freaking cabal. What is left of whiteness is in shambles. So the only thing
isn't that the question though? If the whiteness over white consciousness, you know, the Baldwinian paradox, you know, that is the problematic. But then that's the problem, but it is not universal. It is specific to white people. There is another, that's why this concept of a constancy, even that's what Eddie was talking about. Well, if you looked at it from the logic of dialectics, you could never understand the proletariat because it is separate, though not always, you know, this trialectic thing. But yeah, I would agree with you. And that's why, you know, if we look, that's why I'm so interested I'm more interested in Renee Nicole Good than I am with Alex Pretty. I really am, because there's something about her life and the choices she made that suggested a rejection of white normality. Not completely. She was young. You know, she was working things out. And there, you know, just like Minneapolis is no longer about immigration, which is a beautiful thing. And it's but I'm sorry.
Well, I think part of what it is interesting about Renee Good is that for a lot of white people, queerness is a way to like both flee from, but also find safety in whiteness.
Oh, that's
Like it's kind of like a way to be not, I mean, this is kind of a stereotype at this point, but it's a way to be not like a typical white, but you're still basically white. And I feel like that's something that like I've seen a lot and that we've seen a lot. But I think part of what has changed is that we're now in a moment in history where those choices take on actual consequences in a way that I don't think that they did like 10 years ago.
I agree with you.
Where it's like, I do think that I came up in MOU when like, yeah, a lot of like white people would basically become queer so that they would distance themselves from whiteness, but not really. It's like I don't know. And yeah, it's like virtue signaling. And I think it's different, but there's a general, I guess, process which is happening of the same thing is going with like Martin Luther King and like these Martin Luther King days, where it's like most of the time people just relate to it as virtue signaling, as like, oh, like the community service thing. But it's like things have gotten so serious in the United States where it's like, no, you actually have to confront the real history that we come out of and the real significance of King. And I don't know, yeah, like I am interested in people like Renee Good because it's like it's a type that I feel like because actually I learned that she grew up Presbyterian, which is my denomination. And I was reading this article by a woman who was like childhood friends with her and they grew up in church together. And it's like in some ways it's like to me it feels like a very normal white trajectory in some ways of like, yeah, like a white person.
Is she from Minnesota?
I don't think so. I think she grew up somewhere else. Yeah.
She had recently just moved from Kansas City.
Yeah.
Speak up a little bit.
She had recently moved from Kansas City.
Oh, from Kansas. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know much more than that.
If I'll just add, when we're talking about, the black worker, the white worker, and the changes we're seeing right now, what really stands out to me and where the greatest possibility is not their relationship to the quote means of production, but the way in which people are relating to ideas right now and the world around them, the way they're seeing the world, that is the dynamic edge of this moment and the intervention that I think is necessary to change the course of American history and save us from continuing down this trajectory. The black worker as the basis for civilization cannot be understood without, of course, the political, economical that certainly is indispensable in making sense of the world. But the depth of the black worker as the basis of civilization comes from this rich life world that extends from, the church, the music, the way they see other people and the world. And this is something that can be a part of all people. And so when you change and reorganize society, we have to have some new kind of economy that can take an account for this, but only considering the economy wouldn't even be able to address what we're seeing right now with someone like Alex Freddie or I'm sorry, I'm bad with Renee Goodman. That I don't think that the deepest change in her life or the deepest change that produced someone like her and many others is their relationship to the means of production or some change in the economy. Although, once again, I don't discount that as a factor.
So I would say, and
then we're going to go to our.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, man. That's okay.
I would say this: if we had the strong white-controlled unions in the way that there were in the 1960s, 70s, and we had that quote, silent majority, and that existed right now, this wouldn't be happening, and white people would 100% be siding against all of this. It wouldn't be any kind of.
It's possible, yeah.
No, I mean seriously. When people are 3 meals away from disaster, they no longer believe in the system, no matter how they may have been raised. No matter everything comes into question. Everything. This kind of conflict, this kind of insecurity amongst white people at this particular moment is entirely because they have been deprived of their next meal. They don't know where it's coming. They really don't.
Their next one?
Their next meal.
Oh, definitely.
And when people are, then all of these presumptions, all of these things that they were, brought to, those all come into question, because if this were true, then I would not be going hungry. If this were true, I would not be worried about unemployment. You show me a hungry man, you show me a man that's going to question everything. So I don't think this is, I think the material
this is going to be very interesting.
Very important. And
It is.
without that structure, I mean, white people you saw the riots, Nixon calls up, he goes, I'm calling out to the silent majority to stand up, and a whole bunch of white union people start rushing the streets in the wrong fucking direction, attacking the actual proletariat. That's what would be happening if that captured class of, labor aristocracy still existed, but it doesn't.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to go to the chat. No problem. And then,
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I meant to read comments earlier, but it was too much for back and forth. So I'm sorry, Magna. Okay. Allison, Todd, Bambalai, Super Jolly, some new people say good morning, SG. Magna said, the same way white people can't see a world beyond whiteness, they can't imagine that a world without a West could be based on mutuality and humanity, rather than great power games. They refuse to see that China's rise is an outcome of Bandung, the Group of 77, and the non-aligned movement. And it's not just about China. Shantanu said, on the point of the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, there are several articles from the Wall Street Journal, the National Interest, and the Financial Times that have been coming out. They detail why removing the dollar from its throne is not going to be easy and is not inevitable. Unless there's another global reserve currency that can take its place, global trade will continue to be conducted in dollars. But all these arguments assume that in the absence of the dollar, another country like China or Russia will try to occupy the power vacuum. It's like they can't view the system from a non-white supremacist point of view. The Kingian version of the world vision of the world house has to be adopted to find any way out of this crisis. A few commenters really liked what John was saying, said, I'm impressed. Okay, then iManifesto asked, perhaps we can address how a colonial capitalist system is different from a caste system. And then said, summarizing John's thesis as spiritual crisis, Shantanu said, yes, caste is very different from the systemic state-backed discrimination of Black people in America. Sorry, other people said, good morning, like Colin. Shantanu says, China also holds nearly $700 billion of US sovereign debt, but it is also the only country among the top 10 that hold US debt that has decreased its contribution, which is 11% in the past year. So China is offloading
dropping
bonds, dropping the bonds. Jupiter Hammond is responding on this point of Claude Anderson, the economist. They don't like Claude Anderson and say that his theories are anachronistic and in the 20th century focused on pre-Nixon. And let's see, I think they're, oh, and then let's see, Michelle, just give me a second. SG also says, whites do not have any cultural identity. That is why extreme religious fanaticism or sport becomes a community to substitute. Michelle had a bunch of comments saying, Michelle Bell, which is the usual Michelle that comments. Says Michelle Bell.
Oh, Bell. Okay.
Says elite corporations such as big manufacturing and agriculture do not want immigration enforcement on their personnel. And their influence has got to be huge in all of this because they like underpaying people. Let's see. Shantanu. I think he might have linked an article, but I can't see it. But says that there is an article that draws comparisons between victims of violence during the civil rights era and the crisis we're seeing today with ICE. And it mentions also Viola Liuzzo being shot after responding to King's call, I think in Selma, and follows it up with the killing of Renee Good. And then concludes, the consciousness of the Black freedom movement serves as a foundation for any kind of mass movement today. Yeah, I think he linked it in the comments, but I can't see it. On this point of immigrants and the color line and assimilating into whiteness, SG said, many new African immigrants also look down on African Americans. And Michelle Bell responded saying, yes, it is a very real thing. I've witnessed it, felt it, no, it is real. Black people have not simply decided to dislike immigrants or feel uncomfortable with their presence for no reason. We've got receipts. However, there's no place for brutality to anyone. And every person is an individual deserving of dignity, peace, and fulfillment.
Yeah.
Then Fasaha Trailer said yes in response to something an hour ago. M. Sparks, I think, has lost somebody, and so people are saying condolences. Condolences, Sparks. BK is saying that Claude Anderson feels Dr. King helped destroy the developing Black American economy via his fight and victory for integration. I don't know whether that's true or not. Michelle really liked Emily's point that the ruling elite is doing everything possible to remove human conscience and compassion from discussions of what's wrong with America. And there were a lot of comments. Lenin Du Bois says, Western Europe, France in particular, follows Western Marxism. And David Ball said that the professor, I think that's you, Doc, reminded me of what Lenin observed, that practice was ahead of theory, like in the Cuban Revolution. And said that the Communist Party acknowledges that some students in military fatigues with M1s had nailed the historical conditions, right? But that King nailed it. The party understood this. Martin Luther King was the correct historically designated leader of that time. And Anton Smith says, Du Bois and his Philadelphia Negro is a compelling case study. Written in 1899, still relevant in 2026. It lays out the structural inequalities that came about as a result of racism and poverty. And Michelle Bell said, as a Christian, I understand the meaning of anointed to be not only appointed, but appointed and empowered. And a key distinction of the Black proletariat was that it was formerly enslaved. No other modern proletariat shares that feature. People are discussing this question of the color line, whiteness and blackness, in relation to the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Eris Quanto, I think, is not in agreement about
Whiteness.
like, I think he's saying that whiteness and blackness do not map on perfectly to the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And Todd says the bourgeoisie is white supremacist. It enforces a white supremacist social system, and it includes the metaphysical concept of whiteness. In contrast, blackness is humanness, whereas whiteness is a moral choice. And let's see. I don't know what this last. So, okay. I think that those were most of the comments. Sorry, next time I will try to.
No, that's all right. That's really interesting. Well, I think it's time for us to get ready to go. It's been a long day.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Man.
I speak for myself. It was really wonderful to listen.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
We'll be back next week.
Yeah.